Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the slight tardiness, but only 15 minutes late at this stage of the game is almost early. So with that, I believe we can go ahead and begin, and other members will join us. It's that time of year. So staff, if you are ready to do roll call, I will call this joint meeting of Assembly Ways and Means and Senate Finance to order. Please call the roll.
Senator Brooks.
Here.
Senator Cannizzaro. Senator Dennis.
Here.
Senator Dondero Loop. Here. Senator Goycochea. Here. Senator Hammond. Senator Kieckhefer. Senator Ratty. Here. Senator Siversganzer. Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson. Here. Assemblyman Frierson. Here. Assemblywoman Gorlow. Here. Assemblyman Hafen. Here. Assemblywoman Howdigi. Here. Assemblyman Levitt. Here. Assemblywoman Miller. Here. Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno. Here. Assemblywoman Peters. Here. Assemblyman Roberts. Here. Assemblywoman Titus. Here. Assemblywoman Tolles. Here. Assemblyman Watts. Here. Chair Carlton.
And I am here. Welcome, everyone. It is really nice to see familiar faces in this room again. I have to tell you, it's very, very nice. So with that, we have two bills to go over this morning in joint hearing. Just so everyone has the lay of the land for today, we will recess after this. We will come back this evening to receive the K-12 funding bill. Typically, how that funding bill works is the committee that does not have jurisdiction over the bill, this year it will be a Senate bill, will review it in draft form, so that if any changes need to be made, it doesn't get amended. That slows down the process. So we will view it at the same time with Senate Finance, go through it together, be briefed on it to make sure everyone is good with all the conversation points that we've had over the last year or so on where education needs to be. Then the Senate will take, the Senate Committee on Finance will take the bill down to the Senate and they will begin processing it. But this just makes it a little quicker by doing it this way. So we will be recessing to come back this evening to go over K-12s, just so everyone understands the process. It is the chair's intent to take public comment when we recess, because we don't know for sure exactly when we'll come back. And if there's a glitch, I always want to make sure folks have had the chance who are available, get the opportunity to make their public comment. So with that, we have two bills before us today. The first one is AB 484, and I will invite the speaker to the testimony table.
Good morning.
Ms. Caffaretta, if you could wait, please. Thank you. The speaker's going to do a presentation, and then we'll call on you when we're ready. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, whenever you're ready, please proceed.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Chairman Brooks, members of Senate Finance. For the record, my name is Jason Frierson, Assemblyman for District 8, Speaker of the Nevada State Assembly, and I'm here to present Assembly Bill 484, which in its simplest terms will earmark $54 million in federal relief from the American Rescue Plan to update the information systems of the Department of Employment Training and Rehabilitation. I know many of us are no strangers to the countless phone calls and emails we received from constituents begging for help with their unemployment insurance claims. We all assisted the best we could, but the volume of need overwhelmed our antiquated unemployment system. Nevada was not alone in these struggles. Across the country, states' unemployment systems were crashing with the vast uptick of new claims. Before COVID-19, Nevada's economy was thriving. According to data from DETR, at the end of 2019, Nevada saw an average of 10,000 unemployment insurance claims a year. That's the smallest yearly average since 1999. In February of 2020, Nevada's unemployment rate was just 3.7%. However, by April, the COVID-19 pandemic forced us all to stay inside to save lives of our fellow Nevadans. Unemployment across the country peaked at 14.8%. Unfortunately, in Nevada, we were hit disproportionately hard, and our unemployment rate reached 29.5%. We went from an average of 10,000 yearly unemployment insurance claims to more than 271,000 uninsurance claims by April of 2020. We're all aware that our technology is significantly dated. With limited budgets and many needs, it sometimes comes down to updating technology or providing more critical services to Nevadans in need. We hired additional staff, called upon our retirees, and used every available resource to help Nevadans through this crisis. However, the reality is that despite the extra help, our outdated technology systems left us fighting a fight without equipment that could keep up with our needs. While AB 484 cannot rewrite the past, it can put our state on a path forward to a much-needed 21st century technology upgrade that will help Nevada weather a future tragedy. I'm confident that allocating this future federal aid to DETR will be a worthwhile investment. That concludes my remarks, and of course, Madam Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Speaker Frierson. We appreciate that. Committee members, any questions on anything at this time? Not seeing any. Thank you, Speaker Frierson. We will now go to Ms. Caffaretta and her DETR team. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Carlton. Thank you for the opportunity to provide some additional remarks this morning. My name is Elisa Caffaretta. I'm the director of DETR. I am joined this morning by the DETR team. So we have Chris Sewell, Jenny Castleman, Jeff Frischman, Troy Jordan, Nancy St. Clair in the room, and Marilyn Delmont and Linda Parvin on Zoom. Going to have to jump over some of my comments, but we're very grateful to the governor and the legislature for their leadership and prioritizing support and assistance for DETR, and particularly modernizing the system, as Speaker Frierson eloquently summarized. You are well aware of the needs that brought us to this point. I just want to provide a little bit of information about the collaborations and the work that we've been doing that brought us to this point, and what we anticipate sort of doing moving forward. We do want to also give a shout out to Speaker Buckley and the members of the strike force. They volunteered their time and energy and mapped out the challenges that we faced, as well as some of the strategies for moving forward. They certainly jumped into the deep end on the technical aspects of our work, and their report, I think, provides a very compelling case for why we need to modernize the system. So AB 484 would provide use of eligible federal dollars to modernize our system in the future so that we can serve Nevadans during good times, which we hope to see very soon, and bad, even the very bad that we saw in the pandemic that no one could have anticipated. We want to stress that the department would use these dollars on both immediate system stabilization projects that are high impact, and also that would feed into the larger modernization project. Just want to reassure you that we are doing our due diligence on the analysis of what is needed. Early on in the pandemic, DETR signed a contract with the National Association of State Workforce Agencies. They have an information technology support center that did an assessment of our computer system to determine the best path forward. Would it make more sense to keep the existing system that we have and provide fixes to that? Or would it make more sense to develop an entirely new system? NASWA, the National Association of State Workforce Agencies, is really in a unique position to evaluate this question because they're made up of the workforce agencies of all of the states. And so they have insights into all of the systems that are active in the country and all of the challenges that were faced. Their analysis of our current system is that even though it's a fairly modernized system, it's burdened with costly and underutilized third-party products. It's very difficult to fix or update because the software is complex, and inflexible because it's so dated. The DETR team has had to put in hundreds of programming hours building workarounds to keep the system working. And even though, and the the early 2000s vintage code will further decay over time, just increasing our challenges. The NASWA report included several recommendations that we will be able to implement with the passage of this bill. First of all is to make immediate improvements that have a high return on investment. DETR has steadily been making progress on several of these recommendations, with more that would be able to be implemented with the passage of this bill. We also will take the time to continue to develop the highly skilled programming developers and database administrators that we would need for a modernized UI system, and work to make sure sufficient funding and project management are in place to see these projects through to completion. Ultimately, NASWA recommended that DETR implement a brand new system. And I think the estimate that they provided has been circulating during the session, but just to refresh, vendor development costs, the range that we're seeing in the market today are between $20 and $30 million. Support for staffing and consultants to do the programming needed are in the range of $10 to $12.5 million. The annual operating costs are between $3 and $5 million. And it's fairly typical to include a 10% 10 to 15% project management fee, which is $3.3 to $7.125 million, bringing the estimated total for a modernized system to a range of $36.3 million to $54.6 million. The benefits that Nevada can expect to see from a new UI system, I think, are quite apparent, but specifically we'll realize significant benefits from leveraging modernized technology. Cloud technology specifically provides significant scale, security, and cost advantages. We won't be in the situation we are now, where third-party projects are no longer updated or supported through tech support. The features of the cloud system would also mean that DETR could run and update these systems with lower cost and less often have a need for outside contract resources. The cloud would also allow for much more rapid implementation of emergency programs such as the CARES Act and the Lost Wages Assistance Program. And a modernized system could be designed to take advantage of many of the lessons that we have learned during the pandemic to improve compliance with Department of Labor requirements and provide better service to our claimants. Specifically, we can improve the user experience, which has certainly a long way to go. We could automate processes in the decision-making chain where possible, use chatbots or virtual assistants to answer frequently asked questions, and to incorporate fraud prevention and detection tools as we go along. What DETR is in the process of doing and will continue to immediately improve the system are using technology tools to speed up our processing. We have been doing that, and this bill would allow us to continue to make significant improvements that have a high impact for Nevadans who need these systems. A couple of examples, code review tools can provide improvements in software efficiency. These tools allow us to find and eliminate performance bottlenecks, fix code inefficiencies, and automate testing. And we have talked about the virtual attendant or chat bots that would give claimants access to information about the most frequently asked questions around the clock. This is an adaptable tool that DETR could update in real time as changes are made to programs and policies. And we also see a need to continue to invest in immediate fraud solutions so that we can pay eligible claimants more quickly. We just wanted to sort of wrap up by letting you know what we're doing now to ensure that we can successfully modernize our system as rapidly as possible. DETR's IT governance team, which includes our IT team as well as our business and program staff, They have been working to develop strategic plans in anticipation of funding availability, and they are creating phased project plans. These plans will rely on the expertise of both our team and the expertise of NASWA so that we can move the project forward as expeditiously as possible. We are also coordinating with EATS, the Enterprise Information Technology Services Department of the state, to complete appropriate technology investment notification, which is the form that you need to fill out and the review you need to have when you're moving forward with new technology. And we're relying on their expertise to help us with this system. So we want to conclude by letting you know, we understand that the governor and the legislature have an interest in ensuring that this modernization project and all these recommendations that we have in the interim remain on schedule and on budget. We will schedule regular updates for the governor's office and the legislature as we go along. So to wrap it up, we want to thank the Governor Sisolak and Barbara Buckley and the Strike Force for making sure that we're well equipped to begin this project as soon as funding is available. Dieter's modernization proposal is the result of a comprehensive analysis of our current system and options for moving forward. We have already taken steps to stabilize and speed up the system in the short term, and we are working to move quickly through the state purchasing process with expert support to award the contract and begin the work. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cafferetta. That was very helpful. But you've probably answered a half a dozen of my questions just in your testimony. So that's excellent. I want to make sure and go back when you were breaking down sort of the components of where you were going. Vendor development, 20 to 30 million, support staff, 10 to 12, annual operating, 3 to 5. I'd like to ask about the project management system, 10 to 15% for project management. I'm not sure I'm really familiar on how that term applies. So could you walk through that a little bit so that we have a better understanding of what project management really means?
Thank you for the question, Elisa Cafferetta with Dieter. So I can speak to this a little bit more putting on my welfare hat, and I also can throw it to our IT folks. But when I was at the Division of Welfare and we were working on the NV Kids project, we actually had a project management firm that worked with the agency as well as the computer development team and kept everything on track in terms of schedule and budget, held regular meetings, made sure all the decisions were elevated to the right level in the organization. And so as you move through the cycle of the project, this can look a little bit different in each phase. But really it's an outside team that has the expertise in running implementation of large technology projects, which might not be an expertise that we have in our team to help keep us on track. And so you bring in those resources as consultants to fill the need as in the immediate moment, and then they're not on the Dieter staff. I'll ask Dr. Delmont if you have anything else you would like to add to that explanation.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please introduce yourself and proceed.
Yes, Dr. Marilyn Delmont, IDP Administrator Dieter, for the record. Yes, I'd like to add that when you embark upon these large, complex implementations, there are a lot of coordination and communication and a lot of moving parts. And so the project management using a structured project management methodology becomes very critical in moving a project forward, making sure that the right people are in the room at the table, making sure that implementation is moving forward As I said, there are so many different moving parts within implementing a system such as a new UI system. And so it becomes very critical and crucial that a project management group is available and is ushering us through that entire process from beginning to end to ensure that the project moves along successfully and is delivered, within budget and on time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So committee members, other questions at this time? I believe I have Ms. Gorlow, and then I'm going to start making a list.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on what the timeline is for the project, on when you feel it would be complete, and also elaborate a little bit more on what the immediate and long-term changes would be that you'll be targeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisa Caffaretta from Dieter. So the timeline is fluid, and because we need to develop the RFP for the modernization, and that will, based on the business requirements, really sort of flesh out what the timeline would be. So I would add that there are, we will work with our IT governance team to sort of add some details around sort of the phased implementation. As I did say, we have been implementing where we do have the funds, work to stabilize the system, to increase the security, to increase the speed of the system. And that work will continue because there are certain tools we haven't had the funding for, as well as we also are in the process of doing work right now for adding new fraud tools, and there are some more that could be added with this funding. So it's basically been an ongoing process, and it will continue with high impact projects in the short term, and then we will develop the business requirements and the RFP with the assistance of our IT governance team and NASWA, and that will give us a lot more detail on the timeline based on the business requirements that we need to put in place for the modernization.
Thank you. And with that, I have Senator Dennis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions. So you're anticipating this to be, well, first of all, how did you determine basically you've created a wish list at this point. Where did all of those requirements come from? Was that just an in-house thing, or did you use a consultant to help you?
Elisa Caffaretta with Dieter. It's a combination of recommendations from our team on tools that would help with stabilization, security, improved speeds, and fraud prevention. And then we did have this analysis by NASWA, the National Association of State Workforce Agencies, and they helped us add more detail to intermediate steps we could take to improve those items, as well as they recommended that we modernize the system.
So as you develop then the actual RFP, you're probably going to have some additional things perhaps that you run into, correct? I mean, that you don't realize you need now, but as you start going through this process, you're probably going to need some additional things. Is that accurate?
Elisa Caffaretta for the record. Yes, the RFP process is designed, building the RFP is designed to identify all the business requirements that are needed for the system. So that fleshes out in quite a bit of detail what is needed.
You anticipate that what you're going to get, you talked about cloud-based. Do you anticipate that it's going to be an off-the-shelf type thing that's already been developed that other states are using, or is this going to be a custom set up?
Elisa Caffaretta for the record. So the recommendation from NASWA is that we go through a competitive process. So develop the RFP with the business requirements and then go out to bid. So I could envision a couple of scenarios. One that there are proposals that are off the shelf and others that are customized. The advantage of working with NASWA is that they are involved with all of the states in the country. So they've been involved in, Maryland might have the exact number. They've been involved in the modernization projects of all the states. So they are very up to date on all the projects that are currently underway. And so they can give us incredible insights into the most successful strategies for moving forward. Marilyn, did you have sorry, I don't know if Dr. Delmont had any specific additions to that.
Dr. Marilyn Delmont, IDP Administrator here for the record. NASWA has been involved in the modernization of 20 states. Most recently, I would say 13 states in cloud-based technology, where they have seen huge benefits and returns on investment. And during this pandemic, the states that they've been involved in with cloud-based compared much better than hybrid states and states that are somewhat fairly modernized as ourselves, as far as rolling out, new programs for the CARES Act and those types of faster processing, those types of.
And then lastly, do you anticipate that you're going to have to do systems upgrade in addition to the software upgrades and staff, either adding staff or changing expertise to be able to support the new system?
Dr. Marilyn Delmont, IDP Administrator Leader for the record. The benefit of a cloud-based system is that hosted by a vendor, and the vendor does the programming, of course, with coordination, with theater staff, business and IT staff. They also maintain the system as far as making sure that the system has the patches on a regular basis, system maintenance, and they also provide the highly skilled development staff that's needed for programming. So as far as there would probably be some shifting, in parent staff duties, but not necessarily. I wouldn't necessarily see reduction in staff, but there are auxiliary type systems that we have to take into account as well that may not be available through the cloud-based vendor.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dennis. And with that, I believe I have Ms. Tolles next.
Thank you, Chair. And this question may be just as much for our committee as it is for Dieter, but just through this process, through the RFP process and the phased-in implementation process, what kind of reporting back to the legislative body will it be to IFC? I know we're making a decision on just initial appropriation of the $54 million out of federal funds that are anticipated, but those numbers could change depending on, the RFP process. Either hopefully less if we find a more competitive bid, or possibly more. Could you just, walk us through that?
Lisa Caffaretta for the record. I believe the simple answer is that this is an appropriation, we will need to, just as we would with any other money that's not in our budget, we will be developing work programs and coming to the IFC to bring the money into our budget and attach a work program to it. So you'll be seeing the details as we go along with exactly how the money will be spent. And then, of course, for every contract that most of the contracts that we anticipate under this modernization project, we would be going to the Board of Examiners to get those approved, if not also the IFC. So there are all of those regular steps of approval, and certainly we would be happy to provide updates to any relevant interim committees because we understand the interest in this project and want to keep you all informed and in the loop.
And thank you, Ms. Cafferata. The only caveat I would add to that is this is not an appropriation. It's an authorizations. So it goes into the Authorizations Act, so you won't find it in the Appropriations Act. We are authorizing them to use federal dollars, but it will still come back to IFC for work program approval. And at any time, IFC can also ask for reports and updates in between those time periods to find out where they actually are in the process, moving forward, asking them which components they will be addressing first and what they'll be doing second. So there will definitely be oversight.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Chair, because that was my question was if we appropriate it, and what if we don't use it all and it has to come back, or we have to come back and appropriate more? So the authorization makes sense. So I really appreciate that clarification.
And the technicality is it's federal dollars. These are not going to run through the general fund system. We authorize them to pull these dollars down and to use them with reporting back to us. So small difference there, but big difference in how you address it. So with that, I believe the next person with the question is Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity for the question. And thank you, Director, for the presentation. It definitely gave us a great legislative overview of the process and the next steps. However, my question comes down to the direct impact on how this impacts Nevadans. And so what I'm not hearing in this discussion is actual benchmarks and dates that we can measure success on. And so what I want to know is, when can Nevadans, because we all know what our people are going through right now, how is this going to impact them? When will this project be finished? And once it's finished, what can Nevadans expect at that point? Meaning from the time that a person has to apply for benefits to the actual time that, from the time they first make that application to the time that they receive their benefits, what will that window look like? Because at this point, we're still in very desperate times, and to use the phrase "when I go back, when I go home," I can't even use that phrase because we are still getting phone calls every day here while we're in Carson from our constituents that are struggling and not receiving their benefits. So I'm asking for, what does this actually look like for the everyday person in our state? When can they expect to see the benefit of this project and how it's going to impact them directly?
Elisa Cafferata with Dieter. Thank you for the question. I would sort of reframe, trying to think of the best way to provide the answer. I would say this. The Dieter team has been working diligently, along with the support of the governor and the legislature and the strike force, to provide these answers to Nevadans all during the pandemic. And so when I started, the backlog for claims that needed to be processed was in the hundreds of thousands. And because of all of the measures we have implemented thus far, the backlog is now in UI in the tens of thousands, and those are the more complicated cases that require us, for due process reasons, to get in touch with both the employer and the former employee. Today, the backlog in PUA has been completely cleared out. We are current in PUA cases, and so the guidance from the Federal Department of Labor is that from application to benefits, we need to process about 95% of the cases in 21 days. So we are current on those. The folks that are in the process are getting processed in that recommended timeline. So we have been getting these results for Nevadans all the way along, and they don't have to wait until the end of the modernization. There are certainly places where we still have backlog that we are redeploying our staff. This gives me a chance to give a shout out to the folks at Welfare who are working with us in overtime, who have processed over 100,000 PUA claims. So we have just been digging in and getting through the backlog. We've eliminated that in several places. There is much to go. So I would say what Nevadans will get out of a modernized system when we ultimately get there is a couple of things that are very important. One is we know that every 10 years or so, there is an economic disaster or crisis. And where we were before this particular crisis is at our lowest staffing levels and with the fewest updates to our technology. The idea of a modernized system is that you are not sort of behind when you need to staff up and change your system and implement new programs in response to an emergency. So a modernized system will allow us to scale up quickly in a disaster. And as I think you've all seen, we've had several new programs created by Congress that we had to implement in very short order. The Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, the Extended Benefits, the Lost Wages Program, the additional $600 or $300 a week. And those programs not only were created, they were updated several times. So we've had to implement in very short order a lot of new programs. A modernized system will allow us to do that, as Dr. Delmont said, much more quickly. The states that had systems in the cloud were able to update their systems more quickly. So we think what Nevadans get in the future is a much more sort of future-proof disaster response program that is able to handle the ups and downs of unemployment, given the constraints of the way our administration is funded and the way sort of unemployment is a counter-cyclical program. I hope that answers the question.
Follow-up, Chair? Of course. Thank you. So I appreciate hearing that recommendation from the federal government that it should be from application to benefit 21 days. I think that gives the state a standard to shoot for. But again, my question is, when can we expect the modernization of this system to be complete?
Elisa Caffaretta for Dieter. I know it sounds like I'm, not giving a straightforward answer, and the reason is we have to do the RFP. We have to create the business requirements, what is needed in a system, and then we can tell you how long it will take to implement it. But as Chair Carlton has explained, this is an authorization. We can't draw this money down until we tell you how we are going to spend it, and we will at that point be able to give you a timeline.
And if I may, just to add the extra caveat, we don't have the money yet. So it's really hard to tell how long it's going to take, but we do know that there's an end date on the money. So we know where the back end of it's going to be. We just don't know when the money is going to be made available. So it's kind of difficult to come up with a plan and everybody's working very, very hard to make sure that as soon as those dollars hit, we can start moving through the system. But we don't know when those dollars will actually come across the state borders for us to be able to spend. So it is a difficult question to ask, but we do know the end date. So we know when we have to get our work done by, because those dollars are only good for such a period of time. So with that, I believe I have Dr. Titus next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to ask a question, and I appreciate all this conversation and what we're attempting to do, which is, as Assemblywoman Miller brought forward, was to actually help our constituents and those who are suffering from this pandemic. So I understand all that, but I'm not hearing, I think, really any answers to the questions that have been asked. So I think I need clarification. So my question revolves around, I understand the first line on this bill says if, and we're pretty well reassured that that's going to be a given, but we just don't know when. So we're looking to the future so that if we get this money, it can be placed, and this is where my question is, it's an authorization. So will it be placed when we get this funds in an account in the DETR system, but they can't spend any of it until they come to us? Can you explain the process there?
I'm going to ask staff to weigh in because they can say it much better than I can.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The $2.7 billion, for the record, Sarah Kaufman, Legislative Council Bureau. The $2.7 billion will be deposited into the Authorizations Act, or will be reported in the Authorizations Act. When the money comes, as a result, that will be directly deposited into budget account 1327, which is what was formerly the CARES Act budget, but will now be considered the federal recovery account. And when the work program comes through to request an allocation for this money from DETR, there will be there'll be a work program that basically transfers money from the budget account 1327, the recovery fund, to DETR's account. And so there could be stepping stones. So let's say, for example, DETR wishes to come do the RFP and it may cost a certain amount of the $54 million. They can come present a work program, and this could be various iterations of spending up to this $54 million.
Follow up, Madam Chair? So just for clarification, and thank you, Ms. Kaufman, for that. So in our general funds, we have, when we sit here through this committee, we'll have restricted funds and we'll have unrestricted funds. Is that going to be the same in the 1327 account, where they're actually going to be restricted funds? If we pass this bill, so basically we're restricting $53 million of that fund.
Madam Chair, that is correct. So of the $2.7 billion, this action here would be saying of that amount, $54 million would be allocated for that. Now, moving forward, if the system is completed and it doesn't meet the $54 million, then that leftover remaining dollars can be used for other purposes up to the December 31st, 2024 deadline, when the American Recovery funds must be spent.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And then a question directly to Ms. Caffaretta, if I might, Madam Chair. So in your opening testimony, you mentioned a kind of grand view of the breakdown of these funds, $20 million going to the actual development of the system. But then you mentioned that $10 to $12 million would be allocated to support staff. So I understand that at this point in time, these are federal funds that are coming in, but I always worry about how we're spending the federal funds and then falling off that cliff when suddenly the federal funds are done by 2024, and now we have spent $10 to $12 million on support staff. Are you anticipating that then the state would have to be picking up that $10 to $12 million a year for support staff?
Elisa Caffaretta from DETR for the record. So this high-level budget is from NASWA. This is sort of the approach that they or a ballpark set of figures that they are giving us based on what other states have done. And it is my understanding that there are staff that are needed both at DETR and also you bring in consulting staff to help with the costs that are specifically related to developing and implementing the system. So there is a need for additional computer programmers. There's a need for work to integrate any data systems we have with other data systems. So when we talk about support and staffing, this is specifically for the one-time costs that are needed to support the system. The annual ongoing maintenance costs of $3 to $5 million actually is in the ballpark of what we are spending now on an annual basis, possibly a little bit lower. We do recommend going to a cloud system because there are certain things that the cloud providers do that our staff would not need to do any longer. So we think that the ongoing staffing costs would be consistent or less than we are currently spending.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the questions.
You're very welcome. With that, Senator Dondero-Loop.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ms. Cafferata, I know we've had a ton of fraud through the system, and how in other states does this compare? In other words, if we have this new system, will it lessen that to 0, or will it be 10%, or do we even have an idea?
Lisa Cafferata with DETR. So my understanding is that historically the rates of fraud in unemployment systems have been between 3 and 10%. I think we all know that the fraud that we've seen based on some of the pandemic responses that have been creative have been much higher than that. So I think that has sort of been the standard that we've seen around the country historically is 3 to 10%. We have implemented several fraud protection measures thus far. The ID.me requirement that Congress put in place is going in place for both of our systems. That has significantly reduced applications so far. But every time we implement a security or fraud update, the imposters sort of figure out a way around it. So that is something that we'll continually need to update. And again, it's an advantage of being in the cloud system is that it is easier to update your system and respond to ongoing issues. But I do believe that the fraud level we saw before the pandemic will continue.
Thank you very much. I know that inhibited your ability to respond to people, but I certainly thank all that you and your team have done. So thank you very much.
With that, I have Senator Ratty.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just a quick comment, and I appreciate the indulgence. I really just want to express my gratitude to the team at DETR for taking those numbers from the hundreds of thousands down to the tens of thousands, and then most importantly, want to acknowledge the Speaker, the Majority Leader for bringing us here today and making sure that we do not shut down this session without making a very clear statement that our number one priority, and I want that to be the clearest thing that comes from this hearing, is that our number one priority as a legislature is making sure that at the top of the list, we work to fix the DETR system. And it's not going to be a Band-Aid and baling wire. It's going to be a full deep dive implementation of a modern system that will serve this state for years moving forward. And so while I appreciate all the questions and all the frustrations with where we've been, I see this as a bright day moving forward so that Nevadans get the support that they need in the best of times and in the worst of times. So I just, Speaker and Majority Leader, Governor, who I feel pretty confident is going to sign this one, thank you to all of you.
And thank you, Senator Ratty. And I just want to echo that, over the years, we went through the last downturn, and we saw what Dieter had to go through by taking out the loans, spreading it across the payer base, everything that was involved. We finally got ourselves out of that one right as this one hit. And we had always had conversations about updating the system, but when the state had such huge needs, education, mental health, public safety, and your unemployment rate is at 3%, you have to weigh all those factors when you make those decisions. But the best way to fix Dieter is to put people back to work. So once people get back to work, we can help. It'll make it a little easier to solve some of these problems. So I think there's a bill out there somewhere about that. So that would be a really good thing to do, is just get everybody back to work. So with that, I have Mr. Roberts, and then I'll go down to Senator Hammond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thanks for the presentation this morning. A lot of questions have been asked already. You came up with a decent breakdown on what the money will be allocated for, and I understand you're in an RFP process, or you're about to go in an RFP process. And I was just curious, I know you can't pin down a time frame or anything like that, but what's going to be your goal for the RFP? Are we just going to build a system and just take as long as it takes? Do you have a wish time frame that you're shooting for, a range for implementation?
Elisa Cafferetta for the record. I think it's thanks for the question. We did ask, because this money is time limited, we are aware of the pressing need to move expeditiously. We have asked NASWA, sort of their estimate was 2.5 to 3.5 years. But there have been recent implementations of cloud systems that have been in the 18 months to 2.5 year range. So we understand the limitations. There are ways to sort of build the system in modules. And so we're going to take all of that information and put it together to give you and once we do the RFP, to come up with the best plan to put together the most robust system within the time that the money is available.
And thank you very much for the answer, and that brings into focus at least what you're shooting for. Obviously, we do need to upgrade the system, and we definitely need it for the future. And whatever we can do to help, we're here. Thank you,
Senator Hammond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to echo the sentiments from my colleague in the Senate, Senator Ratty. I think this is definitely one of those issues that crosses both party lines, and we understand the need of getting this done. Many of our constituents have been calling, even during session. I know that we're probably fielding 2, 3, 4, 5 phone calls a day still. Oh, not maybe a day, but a week. And I tell you, your office has been great when it comes to sending over requests and getting things done. But it is definitely one of those issues that we thought was priority number one, which is why we put the SB 419 together with some of the same requests, or at least a portion of the requests in here. Some of the things, though, I noticed that are not in this bill that we were looking at as the report came out from the special master, as well as former Assemblywoman Barbara Buckley had pointed out that there were some things that needed to be addressed. Fraud is definitely one of those that should have been talked about. It has been so far. We talked about the high level of fraud during the pandemic. One of the suggestions that we had made is that although we have a very good system right now when it comes to making sure folks are getting their money, one of the things that could have been done, and we added it in our bill, was talking about the first payment being maybe processed through a check. That way you had not only the state looking at and verifying the recipient, but also an institution, a financial institution, looking at and verifying that the person is who they say they are. Is there still the ability to do that? There are things that we put in our bill at 419 that we thought you needed to have legislation for, but perhaps there's another method of doing that. And so some of those suggestions we put in there, have you thought about, can you implement them without a bill?
Lisa Caffaretta, for the record. Thank you for the question. I think we've reported to various legislative committees that we have reviewed the recommendations of the special master as well as the recommendations from the strike force report. And we are moving forward with implementing those that we can implement now. Several have been completely put in place. Others require sort of either funding or are waiting on SB 75, which has some small technical corrections that we need in our statute. In terms of, just to come back to the question about paying by check, I mean, as you may or may not know, at the very beginning of the pandemic, we had as many as 500,000 initial applications for claims within the first couple of months. We did early on in the pandemic talk to the treasurer's office and the controller's office about issuing checks. They let us know that they would need to buy as many as 5 new check printing machines, because remember, these benefits come out every week. And also we would have to buy check stock, literally the paper to print the checks on, and hire an additional dozen or so folks to work the mail rooms. And so it really wasn't a practical solution for the initial claims. We are required by law to have more than one payment methodology. So checks are available in special cases for folks who don't maybe have bank accounts, but it is very labor intensive. And so it is the exception and not the rule. But we certainly are, as part of the ongoing work we are doing, looking at, are there other ways we can pay claimants going forward, because the world of banking and the world for non-banked individuals is changing. So that will be part of our intermediate and long-term solutions, is alternative payment methods. But those are long-term or intermediate methodologies that we will get to as we can develop them going forward.
Thank you. So if I understood correctly, what you were saying is that...
Follow up?
Follow up, please. Yeah. What I understood is that during the initial beginning of the pandemic, just ramping up to service and getting checks out there really required a purchasing of equipment, maybe additional man hours put into this as well. At a substantial cost, I'd imagine. I'd love to know if you've broken that down, how much that would have cost, because over the time that we were issuing these payments, and when we were sending out money through Dieter, I think during the special session, if I'm not mistaken, I believe we were talking about almost 50% of the money going out was in fraud. We're somewhere between $3 billion to $5 billion. Would we have saved money by sending out, having that alternative form of payment through check?
Lisa Caffaretta, for the record. I don't know that we've done an analysis sort of ongoing what the costs of doing checks would be versus the fraud that went out. We can go back and look at sort of the information that we have, but I think overall, Nevada was just like all the other states that were completely overwhelmed by the volume of claims and particularly on top of that, the volume of fraud. And so we were all working as quickly as we could to implement fraud protection measures. But I guess I would say I am very proud of the work that Dieter did. Again, we alluded to this in the opening comments. You know, we were able to keep our system up and online. Several states took their systems down for weeks at a time to try and get a handle on the challenges that they were facing. And so I think that we certainly can provide you with sort of what we know about this fraud and the costs sort of when we debrief the whole pandemic. But I think we did the best we could with the tools at hand. And I think the team did an excellent job. And the fraud work, particularly, I will let you all know, will be sort of ongoing for several years. We know the Secret Service and the Department of Labor Office of Inspector General have ongoing investigations. I think you'll continue to hear about those investigations and prosecutions for many years to come.
Thank you, Mrs. Cafaretta. I tell you, your staff is to be complimented for the work that they did, and especially under dire circumstances. I think we're all looking forward to seeing a system much improved in the next couple of years, and something that we can rely on in case something like this happens again. I think I'm just looking at some of the solutions, making sure that we look back and see, I guess, what we saw when we look at maybe not the mistakes, but I don't want to call them mistakes, but certainly we learn lessons from looking back, and that's why I want to go back and look at that. The fraud that happened, I think, is to Nevadans. I mean, that was a lot of money that was going out, and so I think we need to look at what we may have what we can learn from that, and then move forward. That's why I wanted to ask that question, but I appreciate it. Appreciate the answer, and look forward to working with you in the future.
And thank you very much, Senator Hammond. In my experience, and I've encountered this a number of times being in this building, you could have a $5 million problem that you need to solve, but it's going to cost you a little over $8 million to implement the solution by doing it through a refund or by check. So we've seen instances where dollars have gone back out and they've never ended up where they needed to be. Certain groups benefited more than other groups did, and it actually cost you more money in the long run by issuing that. And being someone who's had to deal with sending out checks to folks and having them get washed and used multiple times, and have to work with law enforcement to make sure that that particular fraud happens, I think we need to weigh all those components as we move forward. So with that, I have Senator Siversganzer next.
Thank you, Chair Carlton. And so I want to thank you for Dieter and for the work of former Speaker Buckley and Ms. Cafaretta for the work that they've done to help clear up the backlog and to work on the fraud. But I also want to put a little perspective on the timeline of this. So the state was shut down March 17th. Around April 9th, we added people to the call center, so we started sort of the Band-Aid process as we went along to try to deal with people. In July of 2020, we recognized we had at least $2 billion, some of which was already spent, so we had a lot of federal money come in. We made choices with the federal dollars. In August of 2020, we passed SB 3, which really led to kind of getting this all turned around. And since August of last year, which has been about 10 months, we've had choices to make whether we wanted to get a new system using general fund dollars or federal dollars, of which we had a lot of money. And now the way this bill is written, we're going to be waiting to make sure that we have this money that comes in after July 1st. Actually, I'm not sure if that's when we get this federal dollars. Once we know that we recognize that we're going to work on this system. I just think we need a backup plan. And so my question is, whether or not we have the federal funds or not, this needs to be done. It needed to be done sooner. And we've asked for a timeline repeatedly. We don't have a timeline in part because we're waiting for federal dollars. But in my mind, we have general funds available. We've had general funds available. And we've had federal funds available. So I think we need to have an alternative and not wait to secure these federal dollars, that we should be acting now and assume that we need to use general fund dollars if we can't use the federal dollars. But we can switch sources as needed, because this is a lengthy process having to go through, now that we're in May of 2021, an RFP process to put this together. And we've also seen other states do it pretty rapidly. So I appreciate the Band-Aids along the way. I appreciate the work that you've done on the fraud and really getting that under control, and that we have so many more Nevadans that are back to work now, which has taken some pressure off the system. But I think we should have, given $54 million is the number, ways to cover that sooner versus later to get it done and get us on track. Thank you. So do you have a plan? Do you have a plan just in case? And can you start now instead of waiting? Thank you.
Elisa Caffaretta for Dieter. Thank you for the question. I would just reiterate that we have been implementing a variety of measures, both staffing and technology measures, as we've gone along. As you say, there have been infusions of funds from the federal government. So we have put in place several technology improvements to address the fraud, to improve the processing speed of our system, to improve the security of the system, and to allow it to handle the larger scale of applications that we've been processing. We do have several intermediate steps that can be funded if and when the funds become available. And we have been working with the governor's office and the legislature to sort of identify those and prioritize them, so we can pull that out as a plan of intermediate steps that you can see. As far as the backup plan, the first step in the process really is to develop the RFP, which outlines the business and program requirements of a modernized system. At that point, I do believe we can have the conversation with the governor's office and the legislature of the best funding sources and the most expeditious timeline. So as Chair Carlton has pointed out, this is an authorization, but if once we have the RFP and the requirements, we can come to you with the work program and discuss the funding sources that would make the most sense to move this as quickly as possible. But it will, because these RFPs are fairly complex, 400 to 600, even 1,000 business requirements have to be identified. Just building the RFP itself will take a couple of months. So we will sort of be in communication with you as we go along, and we can discuss sort of alternative options for moving forward where it makes sense and where we have a very clear idea of where we are going with the modernization. But I would just reiterate, we have been making improvements. We have several other intermediate steps we can take. So we'll be looking forward to working with you to implement all of these ideas as we go along.
Thank you. I'm very hopeful, since we've known we've had an issue for at least a year, that you can get that RFP turned around, recognizing the issues that we've had and the work of a variety of people and even the information from the courts and some, I can't remember if that was a task force or a commission. Yeah, has done. The state's waited a really long time, and we need to get it done. And there's really, there's a lot of people that are out there who haven't been able to get their checks and all the fraud and all those things. And I think looking at the new system needs to be done immediately, and if not in the past, right? We waited a lot of months to get here. Thank you.
And thank you, Senator, but I think it's very important to reiterate that we had a crisis in this state. People needed money to be able to feed their families and stay housed in the midst of a pandemic. I congratulate Dieter for not bringing the system down, for keeping it running. I wouldn't call it Band-Aids. I think they worked very hard to find solutions to every problem that was in front of them to be able to smooth the system out. But I don't believe any system could have withstood the stress that system took in a matter of 15 days. When you shut down the economic engine of a state on one street and you're literally putting 10 manufacturing plants out of work in one day, I don't think any system could have withstood that. So I am very pleased, and I'm glad that Ms. Caffaretta and those that were there decided not to bring the system down. I think a lot more harm could have been done with that, just trying to survive through those 2 to 3 months to make sure people were taken care of was very, very important. So with that, I think we've had all of our questions asked and answered. Speaker Frierson, any closing comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Jason Frierson. I will just reiterate that what we are trying to do, had we done this 10 years ago, we would be seeing results right now. And so when we're talking about deliverables, the deliverables are for the next crisis. I would hope that DETR would run through the backlog before modernization takes place. But I think that we would have been in a much better place had we been able to have the foresight to modernize our system 10 years ago. I went in my closet and opened a computer I had in law school, and it was actually making sounds trying to turn on. That's our system. So I am not remotely hesitant in investing dollars in trying to modernize our system. And I wish that we had the vision to be able to see that this could happen and had done this a long time ago. So I appreciate the work that DETR did. I agree with you, Madam Chair, that DETR didn't shut down. I appreciate the work that, and I would be remiss to not mention my predecessor on many fronts, and Speaker Barbara Buckley's efforts to help us weather this storm. But it's impossible to know. My computer, imagine if we hadn't updated our computer operating systems for 10 years. So this is an effort to make sure that we're in a better place moving forward. We're better equipped as a state to take care of our citizens for the next crisis. And I think this is a wonderful first step.
Thank you very much, Speaker. With that, this is a bill, so we will go ahead and open it up as a bill hearing for AB 484. Those in support of AB 484, if you would come forward, please. And with our time constraints this morning, if you would be sure to keep your comments to 2 minutes, it would be greatly appreciated.
For the record, my name is Annette Magnus, and I'm the Executive Director of Battleborn Progress. AB 484 is one of the bills that we and Nevadans have been waiting for all session long. And we thank Speaker Frierson for his leadership in bringing this forward. For the past year, members of our team and myself have personally experienced all of the obstacles that you have heard about when it comes to DETR's antiquated system. Part of the work our organization started to do during the pandemic was try to help people navigate the system. People we know had to wait months and months for their case to move forward. Some are still even waiting. This caused many people we know not to be able to pay their rent, their mortgage, afford food, medical bills, and many are still struggling to crawl their way out of the hole of missed payments, fees and fines, and more, all due to an antiquated system. These upgrades are desperately needed, and this is exactly the way we should be using these resources from the federal government. This sets us up to be better off for the future. Nevadans are desperate. Please support AB 484. Thank you.
Thank you. Proceed.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, David Daslich, Director of Government Affairs for the Vegas Chamber. We too are here in support of AB 484. We believe that the modernization of the unemployment system within this state is desperately needed and support using this opportunity to provide a much better system for any future difficulties that we may encounter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else in the room in support? Not seeing anyone else, no other support in the room. Is there anyone in support on Zoom? Not seeing anyone wishing to be recognized on Zoom. Broadcast services, do we have anyone on audio in support this morning?
If you would like to testify in support on AB 484, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 710, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, committee members. My name is Maria Nieto Horta, and I am the Nevada State Coordinator for Mi Familia Vota. That is spelled M-A-R-I-A, last name N-I-E-T-O, space O-R-T-A. As we know, Latinos have been disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, both in health and economically. This bill is needed because Nevada is not ready to face mass evictions. As we know, these evictions are going to affect Latinos, people of color, and immigrants the most. Most Nevadans here do not qualify for relief, and we need to ensure we are protecting them. At MFE, we help them navigate the system. We also provided them with a one-time check relief, and a lot of folks were saying that they were going to be using that check in order to be able to pay for their rent, and they still do not have basic necessities like food.
If I could stop you for a moment, please. I'm sorry. Excuse me. And you're making comment on 484, correct?
486.
Thank you. We're on 484 right now. So if you, that will be our next bill. That'll be, no, that's quite all right. This technology. So I apologize. When we get to the next bill, you'll be queued up then. So, but thank you very much for being here and being available when we get to the next bill. Thank you. So broadcast services, do we have any other support for Assembly Bill 484 on the call line?
Caller 653, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller, please press *6 to unmute. There you go.
Good morning, Assemblywoman Carlton and Vice Senator Moreno. This is Dora Martinez, DORA-MARTINEZ. Good morning to the rest of the Ways and Means and Finance Committee. I represent the Nevada Disability Peer Action Coalition, and we do support this bill with a little reminder for the Dieter gang. Please, when you do get your website fixed, keep people with disability in mind and do not purchase Access-EV because it's an overlay software for your website, and it will not make it accessible for people like myself who is blind. We are the first to go and last to be considered when these type of things happen, especially during the pandemic. A lot of people with disability who are in my coalition were not able to independently fill out the application, and during the pandemic it was very difficult to find a person that they can trust to do that for them. Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Carlton and your committee. You guys are awesome and very resilient. Thank you and have a beautiful morning.
Thank you very much. With that, is there anyone else in support of Assembly Bill 484?
Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone in opposition in the room to Assembly Bill 484? Seeing no one come forward, is there anyone in opposition on Zoom to Assembly Bill 484? Seeing no one wishing to be recognized, broadcast services, do we have any callers in opposition to 484?
If you would like to testify in opposition to AB 484, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there is no one on the line to testify in opposition to 484.
Thank you very much, broadcast services. Is there anyone in the room in neutral? Seeing no one come forward, is there anyone in Zoom in neutral? Seeing no one wishing to be recognized, broadcast services, anyone on the phone line in neutral?
If you would like to testify in neutral on AB 484, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there is no one on the line to testify in neutral at this time.
Thank you very much, broadcast services. I believe the speaker has already made his closing comments, and somehow he slipped out the back door on me. So with that, we will go ahead and close the hearing on Assembly Bill 484, and we will open up the hearing on Assembly Bill 486. With that, I'll invite our presenters forward. Chairman Yeager is presenting the bill. So, Mr. Yeager, if you'd like to just give us the high-level overview of where you're trying to go. I know you do have a proposed conceptual amendment, and since you're presenting the bill and your name is on the amendment, I'm assuming it's a friendly amendment. We could move forward from there. So if we just want to have a comprehensive conversation about how these two pieces of the puzzle fit together, we can move forward from there. Welcome, Mr. Brown. Chair Yeager, please proceed.
Good morning, Chair Carlton, Chair Brooks, and members of the Joint Assembly Ways and Means and Finance Committee. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present Assembly Bill 486 this morning. My name is Steve Yeager. I represent Assembly District 9 in Southwest Las Vegas. As you can see, I'm joined at the table by Mr. Michael Brown, Executive Director of the Governor's Office of Economic Development. We also have behind me and to my right, your Nevada State Treasurer, Zach Conine, and former Speaker Barbara Buckley, Executive Director of the Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada. They have been at the forefront of the state's pandemic response and the work that has gone into this plan on how best to navigate the accompanying housing and evictions crisis. With the chair's permission, I would like to give some very brief opening remarks and then turn it over for very quick remarks to Director Brown, Treasurer Conine, and Speaker Buckley. And after that, I'll take you through the bill and amendment at a very high level, and I'll do that as quickly as I can. And then, of course, we'd be available for some questions. To help with questions, I have Mr. Jim Birchtold, an eviction legal expert, here with us in the room. I also believe we have others on the Zoom to help answer questions, including Judge Melissa Saragosa for the Las Vegas Justice Court and representatives from Clark County. The last 14 months, as you know, have been extremely challenging for everyone, and navigating the housing and evictions has been a particularly arduous task. Like me, I'm sure all of you have heard from and provided help to your constituents experiencing and fearing housing insecurity. Early on, Governor Sisolak recognized the need to keep Nevadans with roofs over their heads as a critical element of the Stay at Home for Nevada plan. The governor has announced an end date to the current state eviction moratorium that is June 1st. Months of thoughtful preparation and work has gone into what you have before you today, Assembly Bill 486, a measured plan that balances the interests and pressing needs of all Nevadans to ensure tenants are able to maintain their housing, landlords are able to be made whole, and our courts and social services systems aren't overwhelmed as we come out of this pandemic. AB 486 seeks to do three main things. Number one, integrate the rental assistance programs into our eviction and mediation process. Number two, ensure people have access to neutral third parties to remedy cases wherever possible. And number three, provide greater assistance to small landlords who may not be able to access federally funded rental assistance. With that, and your permission, Chair Carlton and Chair Brooks, I would like to hand it over to Director Brown.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Michael Brown, Executive Director, Governor's Office of Economic Development. And I'm pleased to testify today on behalf of Governor Sisolak and his administration in support of AB 486 and the amendments brought forth by Assemblyman Yeager. Housing instability is critical to our housing stability is critical to our economy and continues to be one of the most integral pieces of our recovery plan. Housing instability undermines the key infection prevention measures that have been deployed during the pandemic. Policy strategies must be comprehensive and focus not only on the public health challenges, but also supporting recovery and building resilience going forward. Evictions in general disproportionately affect low-income people of color, and the health consequences of eviction widen both racial and social economic disparities in public health. This is particularly an acute challenge in Nevada, where many of our households include parents who are working hourly and non-scheduled jobs. So the governor prioritized keeping people in their home, and now as we begin to move into a different phase of managing this pandemic, and we are seeing economic resurgence, we have to have that glide path to deal with the eviction issue going forward. When workers lose their jobs, they're at risk or lose their homes. They're at risk of homelessness, or they may move into a multifamily setting, which further exacerbates public health risks. And I'll actually submit for the record a piece that I found on eviction and public health, a vicious cycle exacerbated by the pandemic, which came from Public Health Affairs out of Maryland in April, that addresses this issue. Research shows that to reduce infection rates and ease economic hardships, governments need to tackle eviction issues head-on, and that's what this group has been doing. The next step is to move forward and to avoid as many preventable evictions as possible as the moratoriums are lifted, and ensure rental payments are paid to landlords to keep tenants housed. We have to address the vicious cycle where residents can't pay rent and landlords still struggle to pay their bills. Now, we have been aiding, with the assistance of this legislature
and the Interim Finance Committee, small businesses with the PETS program and the Craig program that the Treasurer and I have been jointly managing. AB 486 builds off that by adding further support and assistance specifically for small landlords while continuing to assure that money prevents evictions. My office and his office stand ready to help other government agencies in rolling out that small part of this recovery plan. And with that, I'll turn to my friend and colleague, Treasurer Conine, who has been integral in these assistance programs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Treasurer, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director Brown, Chair Carlton, Chair Brooks. For the record, I'm Zach Conine, and I have the pleasure of serving as your Nevada State Treasurer. Over the course of the pandemic, we've experienced tremendous effects on our economy and our workforce. When Governor Sisolak made the difficult decision in the early part of 2020 to keep people safely in their homes, it became clear that the state was going to need to do something to ensure that tenants could make their rent payments and landlords could be made whole. As many other agencies did, the Treasury got straight to work and found ways that could be helpful to Nevadans who were struggling. We stood up new programs overnight with virtually no support and resources, providing critical assistance to Nevadans in the midst of the crisis. We worked with banks, credit unions, and mortgage servicers to ensure that no one would have their homes foreclosed on them because of COVID-related hardships. We have stood up the largest small business program in history with my friend Director Brown, which has already approved more than $98 million to over 9,000 businesses. And finally, we worked to coordinate the state's rental assistance efforts, otherwise known as the CARES Housing Assistance Program, or CHAP. To date, there's been a significant investment in rental assistance from the federal government, the state, and local communities. The idea behind these rental assistance programs is to allow for tenants to apply for the assistance directly and then ensure that landlords are paid directly to avoid diversion of funds. When we look at Clark County alone, more than $107 million in housing or utility assistance has been paid to more than 24,000 households in Southern Nevada. With additional funding recently provided by the American Rescue Plan, there's a little over $160 million in additional funds that are available for rental assistance, and an additional $100 million beyond that that will go in the program. In total, around the state, there's about $360 million of unspent rental assistance dollars between the original CARES Act, the December Consolidated Appropriations Bill, and the March American Rescue Plan bill. In administering these programs, the Nevada Housing Division, Clark County Social Services, the Reno Housing Authority, and the Nevada Rural Housing Authority have worked tirelessly to get funds out the door so landlords who have been forced to miss out on income due to the eviction moratorium can recoup those costs. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank them for their work. Why do we need this bill? The amount of time and energy that has been put into administering these rental assistance programs throughout the state has been incredible. AB 486 provides critical adjustments to these programs to ensure that they can continue to be effective in meeting the needs of Nevadans when the eviction protections are no longer in place. In administering rental assistance up to this point, one of the more significant challenges we've seen is that we have two different processes in place for people to receive assistance. On one hand, we have the local governments running rental assistance programs that assess eligibility and issue funding. On the other hand, we have a mediation program run through the courts with different processes, different timelines, and much quicker deadlines. Last year, when the moratoriums expired for a short period of time, we saw that mediations and court hearings were happening before a decision was made on the tenant's rental assistance application. That means that even though the tenant was doing the right thing in trying to receive funds to make their landlord whole, barriers in the process may have negatively impacted their eviction status. Additionally, many small landlords have been willing participants in the CHAP and eviction mediation process, yet have become increasingly frustrated at delays and uncertainty in that process. AB 486 will go a long way in helping to smooth out confusion and delays in connecting landlords with federal dollars, which are currently available for rental assistance. To put it simply, this bill will ensure that we don't leave a single federal dollar on the table for rental assistance. It will also make sure that there's no tenant who gets evicted when there are funds available to keep them in their homes. The state of Nevada has a responsibility to expend the hundreds of millions of dollars that we have available to us for rental assistance. By working to connect the rental assistance process with the eviction mediation program, we can work to rebuild the livelihoods of the people who have lost so much during the pandemic. And equally as important, we can help the smaller landlords with one or two properties who are losing everything through no fault of their own. Our office, along with the Housing Division, continues to assess the Treasury guidance as it relates to these rental assistance dollars and how they can be used. And it's critical to note that landlords and tenants are only eligible for the dollars prior to an eviction being effectuated. That's why we need to integrate the rental assistance process into the individual eviction mediation cases to make sure those landlords don't lose out on the opportunity to be made whole. And the same thing, We need to ensure that tenants can avoid a worst-case scenario of having their wages garnished for years to come, while available rental dollars remain available at the state and local levels and go unspent. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak on the importance of this critical piece of legislation. I'd now like to pass it off to Speaker Buckley, who can go into more detail on why the eviction protections in AB 486 are absolutely necessary. And if I could just take a point of privilege to thank Speaker Buckley for all her work. She keeps showing up when we need her, and it's deeply appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Treasurer. Speaker Buckley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Chair Brooks, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Barbara Buckley, and I am former speaker and executive director of Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada, where I've been for 31 years. But I've never seen a year like the year we have just experienced. Not 9/11, when planes stopped flying to our tourist economy, certainly not the last foreclosure crisis. It's a year that's been marked by suffering like I have never seen. People have worked every day in their life, suddenly found themselves out of work, their business shut down. Our unemployment system, as you well know, wasn't ready for 500,000 applications the first day. We had 350 million people on unemployment all last year. Our calls that our staff receive at Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada, and that I receive too, that make their way to my voicemail or my email. The uncertainty, the lack of hope, not knowing what's going to happen, not being able to feed your family, not knowing whether you're going to be staying in your home. You all know. You've heard the same stories. You've lived the same stories. And certainly while we hear people on unemployment have it so good, right? We saw the struggles they faced to get unemployment assistance, the delays, the fees they incurred while they had delays. And just looking at a sample Legal Aid Center client, a server, I compared her income pre-pandemic. Even if you count every stimulus check and every dollar and every bump, her income still is 25% less than it was pre-pandemic. How many people can survive with your bills, your car payment, your house payment, your kids, your medical expenses with a quarter less on unemployment? And it can't be overstated that the governor's action on the moratorium saved lives. If we would have had massive evictions of tens of thousands of people, the spread of COVID would have been significant through our homeless shelters, through families doubling and tripling up. And so I thank him and his staff for their leadership. It's not hard to make the tough decisions. Everybody's a critic, but his actions saved lives. But now it's time to get ready for the post-moratorium world, the recovery world. And thanks to federal assistance, we're in a unique position of having $360 million in rental assistance. That money to pay the landlords who have suffered this past year, large and small, to get them paid, and to stop a mass wave of evictions from occurring right now. We have that opportunity. I think everyone who's been working in this space realized over the past month, it would be a disaster if we just went forward and evicted people in our rocket docket style without marrying the $360 $100 million, right? That would be a disaster. So what do we need to do to marry the programs? Well, that's what this bill before you does. We will marry the rental assistance process to our mediation process and our court process. So just how exactly will we do that? Well, we've been planning. This isn't like we want you to pass this bill and then we'll think about it, right? We have been meeting and planning, and here's how we're going to do it. Most of these comments are about Clark County, but they apply statewide. So first, we created a way for tenants to be able to file an answer from home without even having to leave their home. We have automated rental assistance that now the Treasury guidance is out. All of the programming has been done and the backlogs are now being eliminated. We are going to set up pop-ups for tenants who haven't yet heard about rental assistance or how to respond to an eviction. The Las Vegas Clark County Library District and Legal Aid Center Southern Nevada will be announcing that today. We'll be doing these on Saturdays, and if anyone would like to do one in their districts, let me know. We're going to do one in West Las Vegas Library, one at Trop and Pecos. We're trying to spread them out throughout the community. On site, tenants can get help responding to eviction notices and applying for rental assistance so we can get the applications processed before the evictions. We've recruited 40 volunteer law students from the William S. Boyd School of Law. Shout out to our wonderful Associate Dean, Christine Smith. We've hired law students, and what they will do is on the phone, they will navigate so that people who don't understand upload your W-2 can actually get some help doing that. As a legal community, we're always wanting to expand mediation and alternative dispute resolution because it works. Thanks to the work done by this body last session and Commissioner Shannon Chambers, we have stood up an effective eviction mediation program that we can now expand and rely upon. Communications and relationships with some landlords and tenants have completely broken down, right? They don't trust each other, but with a skilled mediator, we can bring these parties together and get the landlord paid. The landlord can still ultimately evict if future payments aren't made, but a smart landlord is going to want to get the amount that they're owed, and this benefits the tenant because, as Treasurer Conine says, what's going to happen after the eviction crisis is every single one of these tenants are going to be sued for the back rent, for fees, for interest, attorney's fees. We have $360 million to avoid that from happening. AB 486 has a large focus on the key role our legal system plays. The bill will ensure that our courts have jurisdiction and ability to integrate all of the hard work that has been done by so many already, from the Supreme Court to the chiefs of our justice courts to the highest levels of Clark County, legal aid providers, nonprofit organizations statewide. It simply won't, our normal processes just simply won't work for this unique moment in time. We have an opportunity to come out of this crisis while achieving the least harm to the people who have been gravely affected by this crisis. I urge your support of AB 486.
Thank you, Speaker Buckley, and thank you for all the work that you have done. We all appreciate it. Being one of those folks that have helped people stay in their homes, we know how important it is. So with that, Chairman Yeager, I know it's hard to see us up here. It's very disconcerting trying to find the person who's talking. It's like a voice from beyond. Chairman Yeager, if you'd like to go ahead and walk us through the bill with the conceptual amendment and how these two will marry together, and then we'll go ahead and open it up for questions from the committee.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Steve Yeager for the record. Again, thank you for letting other folks weigh in on this. And before I go over the bill, I did want to say, as everyone has noted, this has been a collaborative effort going over the past few months. So there are probably too many people to name, but I just want to say thank you to everyone who pitched in on this. It has been a monumental effort. So I will take you through the bill. And as you noted, there is a conceptual amendment. It does have my name on it, so that is friendly. I will note that conversations are still ongoing about some concerns that are out there. I think we're going to try to get this as right as we can, but I think it's in a good place for this morning. So starting with the bill itself, Section 1 provides definitions, and we've added some additional definitions for clarity in the amendment based on feedback that we received from the judiciary to make sure that we're not creating conflicting statutes. Section 2 allows a tenant that chooses to file an answer to an eviction notice to inform the court that they have a pending rental assistance application. The court will then stay the eviction until the rental assistance application is either granted or denied, unless the landlord shows evidence that the case should be placed on calendar. The problem here is that tenants have been falling through the cracks and have been evicted while their applications for rental assistance were still pending. This section, per the amendment, does not apply in nuisance cases, in commercial evictions, or where the property has been sold, or for the removal of squatters. The way that the bill initially came out, it really applied to every eviction under the sun. That was not our intent. So you'll see in the amendment that we're trying to limit these to make sure that we're getting at the heart of the issue, which is non-payment of rent when there is rental assistance available. Section 2 will also allow a tenant to defend against an eviction by showing that a landlord has refused to accept a granted application for rental assistance. Please note that the amendment in Section 2, subsection 3, cleans up this language, as a wrongful eviction action is not appropriate where no eviction has actually occurred. And I did want to note, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, that LCB did a heck of a job drafting this bill in a very quick time frame. So a lot of these amendments that need to be made are just because I did not provide the level of clarity that I think they needed to make sure that the bill actually reflected the intent, but we'll make sure that that happens going forward. Section 3 of the bill adds an important remedy for a small number of bad actors that we have encountered. It allows a court to penalize a landlord or a tenant to file a wrongful eviction claim against a landlord who evicts them after accepting rental assistance and agreeing not to evict them. There is also a cleanup in the amendment for Section 3, subsection 3, to ensure judges have broad discretion to look at the specific circumstance of each case that might appear in front of him or her. As you've heard during the last special session, an eviction mediation program was created. Section 4 of this bill requires all evictions to go through mediation to ensure that rental assistance dollars are used and to ensure that landlords and tenants can resolve cases outside of court whenever possible. This section, again, does not apply in nuisance cases, does not apply to commercial evictions, does not apply when the property has been sold, or does not apply to removal of squatters. Section 5 requires a landlord to provide tenants with information about the availability of rental assistance, the mediation program, and these changes when filing eviction notices. This is a minor change to landlords' procedures that will have great value to tenants, informing them of what assistance is available and helping them navigate this complex system. And may I say, Madam Chair, I'm delighted to hear Speaker Buckley talk about what the law school is doing to help some of these folks. I think that's going to be a tremendous opportunity and will fit nicely with the provisions of Section 5. A similar requirement for this notification currently exists in the governor's directive that is expiring on June 1st. And we're almost there, committee. Section 6 creates a small landlord assistance program to help connect landlords who have experienced delays directly with rental assistance funding. If a landlord is eligible for funding, the information will be sent to a social services agency for case management and assistance. Section 7 requires the state to disperse $5 million of funds for additional rental assistance in situations where a small landlord is unable to access the existing rental assistance program due to the Treasury guidelines. This will not slow down the progress of the rental assistance programs. Instead, it will complement those programs and compensate those small landlords who may not otherwise qualify for rental assistance. And Madam Chair, if I could note in the conceptual amendment, the very last part of that amendment, I do note that we need to clarify the $5 million that we're discussing in the bill, because the way the bill is the way the bill reads, it suggests that it would be federal funding that has the same housing restrictions that have caused delays. That was not our intent. Our intent is to find $5 million of unrestricted monies so that when we have landlords who cannot engage with the tenant, want to keep the tenant there, want to be made whole, that they'll be able to access that money directly, so it won't have to go through the Treasury guidelines. So I am working with the governor's office to figure out the exact wording of that, but the idea is it would be existing funding that's already out there that is unrestricted in nature, so it wouldn't have those same hurdles in appropriate circumstances. And then lastly, Section 9 sunsets the provisions of the bill on January 1, 2023, Actually, I think I have that date wrong. I think it was June of 2023. Emergency rental assistance funds expire on September 30th, 2025. So it makes sense for the sunset date to be right at the end of the next legislative session, so those who are here in this building can revisit these measures and evaluate where we're at and whether additional changes need to be made. If we are able to disperse and exhaust all rental assistance, which is the goal, there would really be no available rental assistance to trigger the majority of these protections. But so long as that money exists, it's our intent and our goal to connect Nevadans with that help. Lastly, I will note that the amendment changes the effective date of the bill to upon passage and approval, with the goal of implementing this path forward in aligning with the lifting of the broader state eviction protections. A July 1 effective date, as listed in the bill, would fail to protect the most vulnerable because we would have a gap of 30 days between the expiration of the moratorium and these protections going into place. So, Madam Chair, I hope that was a quick enough and high enough overview, and I stand ready for questions. And as noted, I have a number of experts with me here who I think can answer more detailed questions if you have any on the eviction process and how we envision this working in the day-to-day world. So, committee, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate it, and we'll be ready for questions.
Thank you very much, Chair Yeager. So I guess my first question is going to be, because this is a money committee's, you're talking about a $5 million allocation, and you're talking about unrestricted dollars. So could you expand upon that a little bit on what you're actually looking for? Because we heard Speaker Buckley talk about $360 million in rental assistance out there, and you're talking about $5 million. So if you could elaborate on that, please.
Madam Chair, Steve Yeager for the record. If you would allow me, I'd like to invite Treasurer Conine forward, because I've had extensive discussions with him, and I think he can probably explain some of the ongoing issues and what the $5 million is intended to do. And again, with this, the caveat that I'm still working with the governor's office to figure out exactly how we can structure that.
And just to put something on the record, because this is the world I live in my private life, I know of a small nonprofit that went through $2 million in less than a year. So I just want to put that on the record, that $5 million in this particular instance is not a whole lot of money when the six personnel that were there processed enough applications in less than a year to go through almost $2 million. So I just want to have that out on the record. So, good morning. Please introduce yourself and, we're going to Treasurer Conine next. Treasurer, come on up.
Thank you, Chair. And first off, completely agree. $5 million in this universe is not a lot of money, but it's a start to try and provide a safety net for small landlords who are falling into a donut hole of support. So the ERA funds, which are the emergency rental assistance funds that came through the December consolidated bill through Congress, as well as through the ARP, that $360 million of outstanding rental assistance we speak about, have Treasury guidance around them. And one of the big pieces of that Treasury guidance is that funds are unavailable for tenants who make over 80% AMI. And the other requirement is that tenants are involved in the process. So if for whatever reason there's a tenant who is not being responsive and we cannot get them to be responsive through the eviction mediation process, right? So there's a tenant who perhaps has just disappeared, still in the house, but isn't responsive when government reaches out. What we wanted to create was a safety net for small landlords, starting at $5 million, that if nothing else works, we could still try and make them whole. That's the purpose of that money, and I believe in the bill there's language around coming back to IFC if more money is needed for that. I know the governor's office is working through some of the different buckets that could be available for it, but we know that ERA funds can't be available for that specific purpose. Therein lies the need for other funding.
And if you could expand upon the 80%, that's probably something that not everyone on this committee is familiar with. I am, but please proceed.
Treasurer Conine, for the record, I will give it my best and certainly might pass it over to other experts. But in the first CHAP program, when it was put out, we used Flexible Coronavirus Relief Fund, or CRF dollars, from the CARES Act that was passed on March 28th. That was some money of 2020. That was money that was put in both by the state and by the individual counties into the Clark County Social Services, who managed it, and Clark County, the Reno Housing Authority, who managed it in Washoe County, and the Nevada Rural Housing Authority, who managed it in the other 15 counties. That money had no income levels. And so we were able to provide funds to anyone who applied for them who had been impacted by the pandemic. And we were also able to use something called attestation, which meant that the landlord and tenant could say, yes, we were impacted by this. Yes, this is the rent that's on. They could sign under penalty of perjury. And that made the process quicker, because we weren't having to do those deep record requests that I think we've all found during the process create delays, right? They create delays because the tenant has never gone through something like this before, and so they're not sure what information to provide. The landlord, specifically the smaller landlords, those quote-unquote mom and pop landlords, aren't as familiar with having to provide that information. And of course, the government wants to make sure the information is good. And under Treasury guidance, we have to be able to keep track and prove that individuals did fall into the covered population. And so that has led to changes in technology. That's led to some of the slowdown that we're all familiar with in getting the money out the door. And to some extent, that's led to frustration and effectively an abandonment of the process by some of the people who are applying. This is too hard. I'm never going to get there. I've lost my job. Sort of a sense of despair. And one of the goals of this legislation is to provide, through the mediation process, through making it clear who these individuals are, so that we can reach out to them as a government and say, hey, look, I understand perhaps you have a bad relationship with your landlord, but we're here to help. We can find some middle ground here. And so that, the more recent money, ERA 1 and ERA 2, and just to add some complexity to it, the money that came in December, or is coming from the December bill, has different rules than the money that came in March, just because government. And so we're trying to work through that and make sure that we can get all that money out the door and have a safety net at the end of it.
And if you could expand upon the 80% average, and then I think I would like a specific definition. I know it's in the bill, but there's been a lot of talk. What is a small landlord?
Treasurer Conine, for the record, I'll take the first part and then turn over the second part to our legal experts. The 80% AMI is a threshold, so 80% of area median income, so different based on where you live in the state, is the threshold at which you can receive rental assistance under ERA 1, which is the money that came in December. In ERA 2, there's a separate piece of language that refers to another chunk of statute that also constrains the income availability. And that income availability, luckily from an administration process, is looked at in the month that you are applying for aid. So if you're applying for aid in, say, January, it's looking at your income in January compared to the area median income in January. That is obviously complex. That is obviously hard for folks to understand. I don't know of many residents of Nevada who spend a lot of time saying, gosh, I'm at 82% this month. So it extends the process, makes it a little bit difficult. Hopefully that answers your question, Chair.
And thank you, Treasurer. So it would eliminate that 80%. It would allow all folks to apply. Did I understand you correctly?
For that $5 million piece, yes, ma'am.
For that $5 million. And I'll give the committee just a brief example of something that I encountered. We had a lot of folks, and we have to be very proud of this, that make very good money in Las Vegas working at some really good jobs. A lot of our, like, IATSE folks, showroom folks, were way beyond that particular threshold, but they lost their jobs also and were not allowed to access any funding because of where their income was, even though they were at March the 18th, it went to zero. So I thank the treasurer for addressing that, and ultimately it hurt the landlords because the landlords could not collect. So this is a way to that one small group of folks that might be out there might be able to get assistance for their particular landlords, because they did try to work together on that one. So I don't think I have any other questions at this time. committee members?
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead, please.
For the record, my name is Jim Bergtold. I am the directing attorney with the Consumer Rights Project at Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada. I wanted to address your question about small landlords. So under the bill, and this is in section 6 of the bill, a small landlord is basically someone who owns a fourplex or smaller. So it is someone who owns a single family home or a single family residence that could be up to 4 units, is seeking rental assistance for at least one dwelling unit, is domiciled in the state of Nevada. So it's somebody who lives in Nevada, not somebody who owns rental property from out of state, and somebody who makes less than $4 million a year from that rental property.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. I appreciate that. We'll go ahead and open it up for a couple of questions now, since we've got a couple folks at the table. So, Majority Leader, did you have a question?
I do, and I think it's just more about making sure we have intent really clear on the record. So between Section 7 and then Section 6, so we've talked about that $5 million. I think we've got on the record that the goal of that $5 million is to be more pliable and flexible than some of the federal rules around the emergency rental assistance program and that pot of money there. I don't see anything in the language, especially in Section 6, that talks about creating an assistant process that would prevent us from saying that we can tailor that into a way that would look different than what the federal rules tell us we might need in the ERA process, right? So I guess a good example of that would be if we have a person who is on other need-based programs that have done the work to establish a person's financial need, let's say like Medicaid, right? That there might be the option there too, as opposed to standing up a new financial process within Section 6 that there could, since it would be kind of like, I guess, more Nevada dollars that are not attached to the ARA guidelines, that we could have I guess our own process of that attestation on that financial need that would be a shorthand to help get us to where we need to be in these situations where we're dealing with these kinds of timeframes. I don't see anything that precludes that, but just want to make sure that I have agreement that on the record that the process that we're creating in Section 6 can absolutely be tailored to be as flexible as we intend these dollars to be.
Steve Yeager, for the record, I agree with that 100%. The flexibility is there, and one question you might have is, well, why didn't we just try to stand up a whole new program with this $5 million? For those of you who have been dealing with this issue, we thought it best to use the existing programs that are in place in the state and be able to use this money sort of as a supplemental subset of money where they'd be able to disperse that money in certain circumstances, but there is nothing in the bill that I think would preclude any sort of creativity in being able to use our partners on the ground who are already doing this work to figure out best how to administer that money in the appropriate circumstances. And again, the goal is always to use that federal money first, because if we don't use it, we have to give it back, and that would be a shame when the need is here in the state, but there are obviously people that fall outside of that circumstance. And so in those cases, we want to make sure we have the flexibility to make the landlord whole and to keep the tenant with a roof over his or her head.
All right, thank you very much. I'll go to Mr. Hafen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. and thank you, Assemblyman, for bringing this bill forward. I think that we've seen some unprecedented times, and I hope we never see these again. I do have some questions regarding Section 6, Sub 7, where it talks about the landlord has to accept, it appears to be 75%, but then is prohibited from commencing eviction for 90 days after that. My understanding is evictions could take 60, maybe even 90 days at some times. If they agreed to take the 75% and then continued to no longer receive rent after that, and the 90 days and plus the 60 to 100 or 90 more days, could the landlord then come back in for those additional months of non-payment of rent, or are they, I mean, my math looks like it might be 50 cents on the dollar instead of the 75 cents on the dollar. So my question is, could they come back in those kinds of circumstances?
Steve Yeager for the record. Assuming that there's still rental assistance there, I think they could come back. The tenant could come back, certainly if they're, you know, the landlord is, I don't want to say made whole because they're not made whole, but 75% whole, and the agreement is I won't evict for 90 days. So let's say as of that date that happens, there's still no payment. There's no additional rental payment for those next 90 days. Assuming that there's monies available, the tenant would be able to come back and ask for rental assistance to try to satisfy that. If there's a situation where for whatever reason maybe the tenant's not engaging, we would have that extra bucket of money that could be used, and if that wasn't appropriate, then at the conclusion of those 90 days, the landlord would be able to take any action as appropriate to evict. So essentially, the trade-off here is the landlord will get 75% of the arrears that could be going all the way back to March, but in exchange for that, they're going to give a reprieve of at least 90 days before they seek to evict. But if they don't receive rental payments in those 90 days, when that 90-day expires, they can go through the normal process of eviction.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
And if I could just expand on Mr. Haven's question, how did you guys arrive at a 75% number? Because the current programs pay 100%. Even when the landlord tries to tack on fees, we take those fees off. So how did you arrive at 75%?
Steve Yeager for the record. I can't tell you there's any real scientific basis there. I think we just, in sort of looking at this issue, decided where do we think we could land that would be at least somewhat equitable, and also with the realization that we wanted that money to extend as far as possible. But I will tell you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, that's a number that's certainly open for discussion if members want to talk a little bit more about that 75%.
Thank you. Just curious if there was a methodology behind it, so thank you. I believe I have, let me go to my list of folks who would like to ask you questions. I have Ms. Siversganzer, Senator.
Thank you, Chair Carlton. So in looking at this, there's kind of two ways. You've got a notice of eviction and the tenant can start a process, or there's no notice of eviction and then the landlord can start a process on their end. And on the tenant side, it's means tested, so you have to be within a certain range. And if that person isn't within that certain range, then the landlord can apply. If someone starts the process of applying but they don't qualify, is it still all right for the landlord to start their process? Because there's some language here about the tenant has not applied. Is it applied or has it been successfully applied?
Jim Birchtold for the record, and make sure I understand your question. So are you asking if the tenant has already started to apply for rental assistance through the CHAP program, can the landlord also start the process of applying through that supplemental program?
Well, it's probably a little further than that. So someone starts the application as a tenant, but then they don't qualify. But I think when I first read the language, it said if the tenant had tried to, or was applying or had applied, that the landlord couldn't. But in some cases, they're not going to meet the means testing, right? So when I looked up the area median income between 50 and 80% for like one person, it's $28,000 to $44.6 thousand. If you have a family of four, you have to be between or below like $63.7 thousand a year. So somebody's applied, but they're not successful because they probably make more income, and so can the landlord still apply even though the tenant has applied and been unsuccessful?
Jim Birchtold for the record. Yes, I think that's correct. I think it's envisioning situations where the tenant hasn't started the process or the tenant isn't cooperating in starting the process. But certainly if the tenant has applied and has been denied, I see no reason why the landlord couldn't start the process and try to pick that up. And if that's not clear in the language, that certainly is something that could be revised.
Thank you. And then looking at the guidance right now, to qualify again, when you go back to the average median or the area median income, they're using an annual income. And is it locked down on the annual income? Because I think if you were to look back on someone for 3 months, if you were able to look at like a 3-month period, that's going to be different than the last 12 months. Or if you're having to use your federal tax return, right, which represents something completely different than the situation that you're in. So what's the moving target, or is there a moving target on how you qualify for that income?
Steve Yeager, for the record, and with an assist from your Nevada State Treasurer, he said it is they look at it month to month.
Well, I know the definition of the area median income is month to month, but as far as when you're qualifying, is it the month that you're in? So it's your month. So that, in my mind, if people really are short, that's very helpful that it's a moving target, because you can get more folks qualified based on the status that they are at the time versus the prior year. And then my last question was really around, I think it makes sense that the $5 million has some flexibility to it, because if we have a big pot of $360 million and there's no way that somebody's going to qualify to have some relief for landlords, because I think that situation is going to happen. And I don't know whether the ARP funds are going to have a little more discretion to them or not, because it sounds like the 360 is more related to earlier tranches of funding from the federal government. So do you, and I think you wrote the bill to anticipate that you would be looking for other sources. So I guess the question to that would be, would it be 5 million or greater, like a minimum of 5 million? Because you may need more money on that side of it. If people don't qualify on the tenant side.
Steve Yeager, for the record. So the $5 million is envisioned in the bill as sort of what I'll call the seed money to get the program started. But I think we're all trying to look at that exact question of, if we burn through that $5 million, I mean, in an ideal world, maybe we don't. Maybe the 360 that's out there is able to be used. But if we do, is there a way that can be replenished with funds that would similarly not have the restrictions? And so we're sort of working through that. But I think when we envision it, this would be sort of the initial funding, and then sort of based on how it rolls out and the demand, there could be some opportunity to use hopefully additional federal funding that is not restricted in that same sense to replenish the fund.
Thank you. Madam Chair, just one other question. So my other question is related to sort of the timeline, because in my mind, this is sort of the last resort money. You've got a tenant who's not been able to qualify, they've received notices, they know there's a program out there, there's our, not arbitration, but the alternative dispute resolution, you've got that all set up. The timeline of having to wait 60 days to try to find the tenant to say you want to apply is pretty long. And so, because if you do start the eviction process, I'm not familiar, but I'm thinking that's like 60 to 90 days. So maybe we want to look at tightening that up, because this is sort of the last resort for someone. And if a landlord's applying, they're probably pretty strapped for cash at this point in time. Thank you.
Yeah, Steve Yeager, for the record, I'll certainly say that we are continuing to discuss that timeline to try to find what would be the appropriate balance, realizing that the goal, of course, is to use that federal money. And if we need to help the tenant to get there because of some of the difficulties that were mentioned, we want to make sure we have adequate time to do that, but certainly willing to look at the time frame.
So with that, I will go to Ms. Hautegui.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I do have a couple of questions. Thank you for asking about the 75% for the landlord assistance. I had the same question as well, and I just want to add a little bit to that. Assemblyman Yeager, do we know, have any other states done a similar model to provide assistance to landlords when tenants may not be eligible for federal aid through the existing programs? And did they use a similar 75% figure? It's just a little hard where it's just where that landlord could be made 100% whole, and unfortunately they can't, because the tenant might make too much money to qualify for federal assistance. So I mean, I understand trying to stretch the money as far as we can with the $5 million, because I don't think $5 million is going to go very far. We saw how quickly we went through some of the other rental assistance dollars, and so I just kind of wanted to start there. Is that if that was maybe a number that other states had used, 75%.
Steve Yeager, for the record, and again, with an assist from our Nevada State Treasurer, who is sort of probably the expert on other states and what they're doing. He'd indicated that I think both California and New York have instituted similar programs with likewise a 75% number. Although, to be candid, I don't know that they've paid anything out on those programs. And part of this program and trying to set it up was looking at the obstacles that they had in those programs, because I think what we saw there was they set programs up, but they're just not getting money deployed. And some of that, I believe, is because they tried to set up a separate new standalone program, which was why we chose the option of trying to use the existing programs and supplementing the funds. So hopefully that process is going to actually get money out the door, because the last thing we want to do is set up this program and nobody actually gets any money and tenants get evicted. That would be the worst case scenario for us, obviously.
Okay, and then if I could follow up, Madam Chair, and then I just want to understand the process, because I know you mentioned that this bill would help marry the process, the assistance through the eviction process. And so if a tenant has applied for rental assistance and they don't qualify because maybe they make 90% AMI, correct? And then the landlord files an eviction through the courts, would it be the court's responsibility to let the landlord know that there is assistance out there for them? Say the landlord just doesn't apply for the assistance, I mean, would the courts require the landlord to apply for that assistance to keep that tenant in their home?
Jim Birchtold. So currently under the bill, there is no requirement that the landlord apply before the eviction go forward. But the application for the landlord for that supplemental program is always available to the program or to the landlord. So they could frankly apply at any time. As far as the court notifying the landlord that that program exists, I don't think there's any currently nothing in the bill that would require the court to notify the landlord that the program exists. So there would hopefully be some mechanism to get that information out to the landlord, but that is not specifically built into the bill.
And Steve Yeager, for the record, I think I can shed a little bit of light on this too, because if you think of a scenario where a landlord files a landlord seeks to summarily evict a tenant. First of all, the tenant has to answer. If the tenant doesn't do something affirmative, the eviction is going to go forward. And I think what we've learned, I think the latest stats were 3 out of 4 tenants don't ever file anything. So we're talking about only really 25% currently of tenants are even engaging in the court process to be able to sort of open up an eviction proceeding. In those cases, what this bill does, it allows the tenant to say, look, I have a pending application for rental assistance. That's not necessarily happening now. And then if that's the case, the court sort of stays that proceeding. But to your question of, well, what if the tenant doesn't qualify? What happens then? I think this is where you see the really nice marriage of the eviction mediation program that is there as well, because I think the idea is that kind of program can at least inform the landlord that even if your tenant doesn't qualify, there's this additional tranche of money that you may be eligible for. Now, if the landlord says, I don't want to do that, they don't have to do it. They can proceed forward with the eviction if the tenant doesn't qualify, but at least they would have that opportunity to make that analysis in their own mind of, do I want to evict, or do I want to try to get some money through this program so that I'm at least recoup some of my money, and maybe this is a good tenant and I want them to stay. So I think we'll see that hopefully working together, those 2 or 3 pieces, in a way that they haven't worked together so far. At least that's the aspiration of the legislation.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, for your indulgence. And then, is there any way you can anticipate whether $5 million would be enough based on how many people have not qualified for the rental assistance that have applied? Do we have those figures tracked? How many people have actually applied that weren't awarded assistance?
Steve Yeager, for the record, I'm going to hand that over to your Nevada State Treasurer.
Treasurer Conine, for the record, I'll give a shot, and then I think Jim might have some more recent information. So one of the reasons why we wanted to start with $5 million and have it be a very open process, and we've had this conversation with the Apartment Association, with the realtors, and with a number of other stakeholders, is because we don't have a great idea. In the first ERA 1, which were the funds that came through the December bill, started being dispersed relatively recently in the last couple of weeks. And they've had some people fall out of the queue. The queue was about this big, and now the queue is about 9,000 people applying, down from in the 20,000 range. We don't know if that's because of income, or because of the additional paperwork, or because they went back to work and don't need the help anymore. The sort of for what reason that tenants would fall out of the queue is unknown. And so we want to do this program so that we can get that data and understand who's falling into what donut holes, because in parallel with this effort is an effort in constant communication with the White House and the federal delegation to make changes to the ERA program funding that is already out there to be more, to match the needs of Nevadans. And so as we know from a Treasury guidance perspective, at least if the CARES Act is anything to speak of, that guidance is going to change. It's going to adjust. And if there's an opportunity for us to say, hey, look, here's the data. Here are the people that are falling in the donut hole here in Nevada. Not only do we want to get them the funds, but we want to get that data direct and specific at a statewide level so that we can communicate and try to get those funding streams and the guidance associated with them adjusted.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And you're welcome, Ms. Howdeggy. And to the communications issue, I will tell you that over the last year, I had numerous people call me saying that the apartment managers or the landlords had left letters taped to their front door with my agency's phone number on it to give us a call. So believe me, if there's money out there and the word gets out, it will get to the right people. And I had landlords calling, asking, can I apply for this too? So that was part of the conversation moving forward because they were in the same position. So trying to address that, I don't think communication on this issue will be a problem. The word of mouth, it will be like wildfire once they find out that this is available. So Senator Kickover is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. So I see the bill working sort of with these multiple sort of entities having to be functioning on all, or firing on all cylinders, right? So you've got the justice courts processing the actual evictions. You've got the Supreme Court's mediation program. You've got the local housing authorities processing the applications for assistance. I think that's where the applications go, right? And then you've got sort of some of these fixed timelines. So I guess my question is more like bandwidth and capacity and functionality. Are they all working together in a way right now that is going to make these deadlines actually feasible, or where are we? Are courts going to need some more money to do this? Where are we?
So over the past couple of months, Legal Aid Center of Southern
Your name
Nevada.
for the record, please.
Oh, I apologize.
That's quite all right.
Jim Birchtold for the record. Over the past couple of months, Legal Aid Center has been part of a working group that has included Clark County Social Services. It's included representatives from the Justice Court, all of the stakeholders, all of the parties who are working on this effort. And it's been surprisingly successful how everyone has come together to really make this happen. The unknown is we just don't know how many evictions we're facing right now. Estimates have ranged up to 130,000 households. We don't know if that's accurate. We don't know if it's going to hit all at once, if it's going to be spread out. So as far as capacity, the idea is that with this bill in place, it will regulate how fast everything is moving forward and marry the processes together so that you don't have one process overwhelmed and one process doing nothing and everything's together. So that's the goal anyway.
Yeah, that's sort of how I've read it as well. I appreciate that. So how long right now is it taking for either the housing authorities or agencies to process applications for rental assistance? Is that within the 30-day time frame that's in the bill? Anybody can answer. Ms. Bordelin.
We're going to take an assist, Bailey Bordelin, representing the Nevada Coalition of Legal Service Providers. I am going to pass that to Kevin Schiller, but I want to say part of what we're solving here is the variable that you just asked. How long is an application taking? And so there's a real equity piece to this that this bill brings us, where right now, and Clark County can certainly speak to this, we're putting out fires all the time. So we're not going in order of who applied for rental assistance in a way that makes sense. We're going in order of who is at risk of eviction today, and can we put that fire out before the lockout is effectuated, which really means that our patient landlords and our affordable housing providers and the people who don't want to serve mass evictions are sort of losing, because they don't get to the front of the rental assistance pile because they haven't filed those eviction cases that has set off the fire of the burning house that we need to put out. So by putting this in place, we're bringing some equity to that timeline so that somebody who's been patiently waiting for 6 months doesn't keep getting bumped to the landlord that's trying to effectuate a lockout today.
All right, I appreciate that. So maybe I'm misreading something. In Section 2, if there's an application for rental assistance, the eviction process will be stayed sort of indefinitely until that there's a resolution to that, right? And maybe these are different timelines or different processes, but in Section 4, it indicates that evictions must be stayed not more than 30 days to facilitate a program of alternative dispute resolution. So maybe I'm just misunderstanding this since it's not my subject matter expertise. Which one is it?
Bailey Bordelin for the record. So we're waiting until that application is processed, but those applications are going to be processed in a more timely fashion because we won't have the fires of the evictions occurring on a day-to-day basis. So the mediation will occur within 30 days, and that mediation process should be able to connect that case with rental assistance, but not every case is going to mediation. So we've got a few different lanes occurring here. But what I think Kevin can speak to is how this will allow the process for rental assistance to work better. So I'm going to pass to him.
Mr. Schiller, welcome to the committee. I believe you might be muted. It's nice to see you.
Good morning. For the record, Kevin Schiller, Assistant County Manager with Clark County. Through you, Madam Chair, to Senator's question, I wanted to highlight a couple pieces as we discuss the eviction prioritization and that process. So really the intent of that, you asked about the capacity issue. I think the intent is really to prioritize those in the social service realm. We have an internal team of about 27 staff that will be prioritizing those evictions as they come through to the top of the line based on that referral process and the notice. So that connection into the justice court, social service, and the mediation is really critical. We really don't know the volume, as has been stated multiple times, but what I will tell you is with the second round of rental assistance funds, the Treasury guidance that was provided and requires fairly extensive documentation, which is part of the reason it's hard to answer the question in terms of capacities and timeframes. In some instances, an application may come to the top of the line after sitting there for 4 weeks. They're complete and it goes out the door quickly. In others, we're chasing documentation. We are doing timelines tied to requirements for that documentation. So if that doesn't get received within about a 10-day time frame and they're sitting in the queue, we move to the next applicant. But there are really two freeways happening. There's one happening on one side, which is tied specifically to processing under the traditional CHAP and application process. And then the second freeway is more what we're speaking here today in terms of the eviction process, prioritizing those evictions through a connection. And the piece that hasn't been spoken to, which I think is critical, is let's just assume that that is prioritized and they're ineligible. There's obviously dollars being set aside and proposed in this bill to support that process. But at the end of the day, in the social service realm, we are responsible for rehousing those individuals so they aren't homeless. So there's actually a secondary component to the prioritization and the connection with the courts that has never existed, which will allow us to be proactive in the rehousing of those individuals outside of just providing the rental assistance.
Thank you, Mr. Schiller. And I think final question, Madam Chair. Does everyone have the resources that are necessary to get this done? I mean, I worry about the flood that that may come in and whether there's adequate funding for the social services agencies, for the housing authorities, for the courts, and maybe there's administrative expenses that can be taken off the top. I'm not aware of that. And then also specifically to Home Means Nevada, I'm not sure if they're actively going to be engaged in the homeowner assistance program that's a part of the ARP as well. But I'm just worried about agency and Home Means Nevada capacity to get the job done that we're asking them to do.
For the record, Kevin Schiller, Assistant County Manager, Clark County, through Madam Chair to you, Senator T. Kepper. I would, your question's right on question in terms of the capacity issue. So to give some sense of context, we have added, so in our social service department, we have about 125 to 130 staff. In the second round of ERA, using all the administrative funds to update the IT and processes, we have updated to 300 temporary staff that provide processing for this. In the capacity side, I can't speak to the housing authority side and the other jurisdictions, but what I will say is from a funding perspective, anywhere we can utilize administrative funding to support the additional temp staffing, that's what we're going to be doing in that prioritization. This eviction court process was actually, we started working on this actually almost 12 weeks ago, specific to how we can integrate and use our internal staff so that we can maximize that capacity. But to answer your question directly, we'll have about 300 total staff that will be processing, and anywhere we get additional admin dollars, we will apply that to increase that to keep managing the capacity based on what we see.
Thank you, Mr. Schiller. I have a question for you from Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson. And then I'll go back to the queue of questions of folks that have other questions.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And it's a really simple question, and it's a process question. I apologize that I have to ask it on the record. Most of the processes, when they were first set up in the first round of the programs, were applications were all online, and that process was done online just by the tenant. And I didn't know in the new federal guidelines if they were that prescriptive as to how the mechanism by how a person can apply. The one thing I did experience, and the one thing that I would hope that we have the ability with this chunk of money of this $5 million and with Home Means Nevada, is that there's the option there for a paper application process. Because if you're going to have helpers helping people, especially on this documentation process, I think that's important. Because otherwise, my experience has been most tenants who are applying for this with the lower AMI are literally taking pictures front and back of their financial statements on their phone. So uploading all of that via a mobile phone on the electronic process can be hard and can be daunting, and you end up with like 98 pages uploaded because you've got to do front and back. Whereas something that's been, easier that we've learned, like by still having Medicaid applications around with the paper application, is when you have helpers, students, and all the good people who are going to go out there and help do it, is you can kind of scoop all of those up, find a more effective way just to get them scanned and uploaded, and then get a paper documentations in faster. So I just didn't know if it was the feds being that prescriptive, or if we would indeed have the flexibility to say we've got two modes to get this process started.
For the record, Kevin Schiller, Assistant County Manager, Clark County. Through the chair to you, Assemblywoman Thompson. I would answer that directly. The intent of the collaboration on the nonprofits for support is to address that specific issue. Obviously, and I'll just take it at twofold. One, the documentation requirement and the uploading of those documents is probably the most significant primary barrier we see to applicants being denied and or dropping out of the system. For those that are most in need that lack that IT capability, that's what the intent of this nonprofit site is, so that we can actually assign out through our pop-ups and assist people directly where they can't download that information or do not have the IT access. So we're really trying to eliminate that barrier across the whole spectrum. There was not a federal requirement tied to the paper or the IT side. Obviously, we upgraded and spent millions on our portal because of the thousands and thousands of applicants we were experiencing and continue to. But we do recognize that, and that's really our intent in terms of a grassroots effort to make sure we get everybody included.
And with that, I believe I can go to the next person with a question. We'll go to Assemblywoman Tolles.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for bringing this legislation forward and all the pieces and parts that go together. I'm trying to, I appreciate the $5 million, particularly recognizing that there are some smaller landlords that might fall through the cracks. And I know we've had a lot of questions already about what happens if that runs out, or, that's a base point and so forth. But I'm curious how that interacts with sections 1 through 6. So we have some assumptions here of the affirmative defense that's tied to availability of funds for both the tenants and the landlords. And so in that pocket of those smaller landlords that we're trying to address with the 5 million, what happens if that does run out? Am I, as that small landlord, still tied to the restrictions in section 1 through 6? Because it's based on assumptions there's funding, and then if there's not funding, I'm still then tied to those, those presumptions of an affirmative defense, correct?
So, so I think the way it would work is the landlord. So in short, yes, that's right. The idea is to steer as many people as possible to that, to the American Rescue Act money, right? So hopefully the $5 million will not be utilized in most situations. You'll see in the bill that there is a nonprofit element where somebody reaches out to the tenant, contacts the tenant, and tries to get the tenant to apply for the rental assistance, to assist them to apply for the rental assistance, to steer them into that other pot of money, the big pot of money. So hopefully most of those will go over there. Now, if for some reason, let's say that the tenant has been totally uncooperative, has not responded to the landlord's request, so the landlord has been forced to access this pot of money. Whether or not they'll go through those other chains in the eviction process is somewhat questionable, because if the tenant has been that inactive, it's likely that they won't respond to the summary eviction case, and the summary eviction will be granted by default.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think you hear my concern, though, that we'll end up with, especially when I hear our chair talk about how quickly one nonprofit ran through $2 million. There's a concern there that we've put protections in place for that tenant, and even penalties. But the flip side of that is for that landlord in that pocket, that very small landlord, that the money's not available, then they're left just holding that. And so my concern is what protection is there on the flip side of that?
Well, Jim Birch told for the record. So let's think of it this way. So the tenant's been uncooperative, has not responded. Landlord has tried to dial into that $5 million pot, has been unsuccessful for whatever reason. Maybe the money's gone, so the landlord applies for the regular eviction process. Now, if the landlord files for serves the tenant with an eviction notice, then that tenant would be required to respond. In responding, the only way the tenant's going to get those protections is if the tenant has applied for rental assistance. So that will get the landlord from the $5 million pot into the $360 million pot.
Okay. With that, I believe we'll go to the next question, which is from Senator Hammond, and we do need to keep our eye on the clock. We do have a lot yet to go, so Senator Hammond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the question I have is, I've got an email. Several of us got lots of emails, and this particular one struck me because I think that there's a hole, right? Sometimes when you create programs and you create solutions to them, sometimes you want them to be rock solid. You want to make sure nothing is out of the ordinary, but sometimes there are cracks. I guess sometimes in the cracks, that's where we see the light. In this case, you have a woman who had a home in Southern Nevada. She found out she had stage 3 cancer, decided that she needed to move in with her daughter who lives in California to receive treatment there in California. So she's renting out her home. She did hire somebody, a rental agent, who then rented it out to a single man who makes $80,000 a year. So if you look down the list of qualifiers for landlords, she would probably meet all those requirements. But when you go over to his side, the renter's side, you find out that he makes $80,000 a year. So he doesn't quite make the cut for being able to allow her to receive 75% of what he owes. He stopped making rental payments back in November. The way I look at this, the way I read this, she won't be able to recuperate. And even if she could, it'd only be 75% of what she needs. And again, she has no job. She's living with her daughter, and she needs money to pay for her medical bills. She'd have to wait until June 1st. And at June 1st, she could then, because right now she can't evict because he makes less than the $99,000 required for that. So she'd have to wait till June 1st. And then after June 1st, she'd still have to wait she could wait up to 90 days in order to evict, which means we're talking almost a year. We're almost a year where she hasn't received a payment for the one home that she owns. What am I missing there? Because that's the problem I see, is that you're pushing this off, and then so some people who fall in these cracks, and we finally see the light there, we don't know what to do for them. Explain that to me.
Treasurer Conan, for the record, I appreciate the question. I think you highlight one of the overarching challenges and opportunities throughout this entire process, which is we're dealing with something that is unprecedented, with an unprecedented response. And sometimes there are individuals who are more or less impacted by that response. In your example, if the gentleman at $80,000 a year is still working, right, and then his AMI remains at that.
That is correct. He's still working.
Right. So he's a bad actor, right? He's taking advantage of the situation. That allows us, post this bill passing, right, he wouldn't be able to apply for rental assistance because he doesn't meet the qualifications. So she would be able to proceed with eviction and at the same time proceed for funding that would go into that donut hole bucket, right? And our goal is to make her whole. We don't have control over the federal guidance. The federal guidance was put out by the Treasury, not mine. But what we do have control of is trying to come up with programs that can help individuals like that woman be made whole, while at the same time realizing that that is a single scenario, and we don't know how many of those scenarios there are. And one of the reasons why we wanted to create this donut hole and collect this data is because what we're dealing with is a lot of anecdotes, and anecdotes are important, but data we can do something with. And so this will give us the data to let us make decisions and let us allocate funds using the Every Nevadan Recovery Framework, the commitment that the governor and myself and legislative leadership and everyone else has to making sure that we spend these federal dollars as effectively as possible. This gives us the data to do that. It gives us the data to lobby the White House, the Treasury, and our federal delegation to change the rules to make sure that the woman in your anecdote and other people who are harmed by this, who have fallen through the cracks, can get helped.
Okay, so I understand. So in this
Follow-up?
anecdote, yes, follow up. In this anecdote where you pass this bill, or we pass this bill, again, when in the timeline, I'm looking more at the timeline. When in this timeline would she then be able to start to fill the, be able to fill this donut hole that is being created for the, since November, given the I think the 90 days that they can go through the process for that process to fill out. So when does she start to be able to recover that?
Treasurer Conan, for the record, I'll turn it over to Jim from a timeline perspective, but I do think it's important to recognize that in all of these programs, aid can go back to the beginning of the pandemic. So if, to March, right? So if she has had that situation since March, she would be able to then go back and apply under the rules and restrictions of the program since the beginning of that time frame. But Jim can probably answer that.
Still only getting 75% of what is owed.
Yes, sir. And I think, in Treasurer Conan, for the record, I think it's important to mention that this is not a perfect solution. There is no perfect solution to an unprecedented problem. What this solution does is it allows us to help as many landlords as possible. Remembering, of course, that landlords in this case could have also applied for pets. They could have also applied for other programs along the way, and many of them did. It lets us help those individuals to the best of our ability, right, and to help more of them. And I think, when we compare 75% to what the actual recovery would be in most cases when someone is sued for back rent, right, which is an expensive process wouldn't be in small claims court. In your example, probably maybe right on the line. But either way, it's an expensive process, and the chance of recovery isn't great, right? And so we think that 75% is better than 0%. But again, a discussion for the legislature, and I think Chairman Yeager already expressed an interest in having a conversation about that number if you'd like to.
Jim Birchtold for the record. Actually, I don't really have anything to add to that. On the 60 to 90 day period, as Chair Yeager said, there's no real rationale for that, so maybe there's some room to talk. But the goal is to have pots for everybody, and the fact that she is able to access that pot at all is a huge advantage, because otherwise her option is to sue that tenant and try to recover that money, and that's always a difficult option.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But like I stated before, I don't think she has access to that pot. Oh, okay.
Treasurer Conine, she would.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because of the income qualifier. Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I don't see anyone else with questions at this time.
Madam Chair,
Senator Ratty.
Thank you. Just to follow on that example, sorry, Treasurer, just two clarifying points. So I think the reason the 75% is important is that particular example and everything that she's facing, she's probably not going to be the first one in line. And so the whole point of that 75 is to stretch the resources longer. And my concern for her would be if she's not the first one to apply and get that money in pretty quick, it's gone before it ever gets to her and she has zero. And so the 75% is for her and everybody else who may not be the most sophisticated actor in the landlord-tenant system to try to stretch that money as far as possible. Is that accurate?
Treasurer Conine, for the record, yes, ma'am.
And then I think the other piece that I would like clarification on is if this bill doesn't pass, then what she is facing is a backlogged eviction system where even if she responds and her tenant, who does seem to be one of the more sophisticated players, challenges, because he's likely to, then she's facing an unknown period of time while our courts make their way through perhaps 130,000 evictions. And that could be much longer than 90 days. Is that correct?
Treasurer Conine, for the record, yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
With that, questions are over with. Thank you very much, Treasurer. Thank you, Mr. Birchfield. Thank you all for working on this. And I believe since this is the hearing for Assembly Bill 486, I'm going to go ahead and open up for support, opposition, and neutral. Please keep in mind that we are up against the clock and we would like to keep each comment to 2 minutes. We're going to try to be very strict with that at this time because we still need to get to public comment before we recess for this evening. So with that, we'll open it up for support of Assembly Bill 486. Please proceed, Ms. Magnus.
For the record, my name is Annette Magnus, and I'm the Executive Director of Battleborn Progress. We are in strong support of Assembly Bill 486. For the past year, our organization have had many of our own members who have suffered from economic impacts of COVID-19 and were threatened with eviction for their inability to pay. I have personally stepped in on numerous occasions to try to assist Nevadans in need, one of which almost committed suicide because of this. Nevada is once again facing a housing and eviction crisis. The situation is dire and we must act now. Nevadans are counting on you to help them through this crisis. All of the things you have worked on this session, to me, COVID relief is the #1 issue we must address. This funding will be well spent, and Nevadans are desperate for this aid. If there is no action, we will see this crisis grow in exponential ways. Please support AB 486. Thank you for your time.
Next person, please.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christine Saunders, and I'm the Policy Director with Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada, here in support of Assembly Bill 486. At PLAN, we focus on community organizing and policy advocacy. However, during the pandemic, we often did direct service to help people who reached out about the eviction moratorium. Throughout this process, we've printed the CDC declaration for people, helped file answers to eviction notices, helped families apply for rental assistance, connected people to legal resources, and even helped some people move. And while many landlords have been helpful, we've also heard countless stories of bad actors, like landlords refusing to complete the W-9 with the county to be able to accept rental assistance even once someone has been approved, and of landlords who accepted rental assistance but found ways to evict tenants anyways. AB 486 will ensure that families are given due process through eviction mediation and the rental assistance program. Evictions and economic displacement impact us all by putting more economic burden on our communities through increased demands on social services, shelters, and hospitals by families who become homeless and other costs associated with the disruption caused by housing instability. By contrast, stable homes promote educational opportunity for children and economic opportunity for families, allowing Nevadans to save for a house, pursue new employment options, and open new businesses. With only days until the state's eviction moratorium ends, we must pass AB 486 swiftly to protect Nevada families. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead. Good morning, Madam Chair. My name is Holly Wellborn, Policy Director for the ACLU of Nevada, testifying in support of AB 486. We thank Chair Yeager for his wisdom in bringing this bill forward and to respond to the impending eviction crisis. Nevada was hit particularly hard by the economic devastation of the COVID-19 pandemic. This crisis affects all Nevadans, but the history of toxic and discriminatory housing policies and the persistent exclusionary practices, racially exclusionary practices, caused this crisis to disproportionately impact people of color. Black women especially face housing disparities due not just to the history of housing inequity, but also due to the enormous wealth gaps that exist. This bill is necessary to ensure that vulnerable residents do not fall off the cliff of an evictions crisis, and we encourage your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Thank you, Chair Carlton, Chair Brooks, and members of the Joint Committee. My name is Benjamin Challoner, Policy Director for Faith in Action Nevada, a nonpartisan, multi-faith organization that organizes and advocates for social, racial, and economic justice, as well as an inclusive democracy in both Southern and Northern Nevada. I'm here to speak in strong support of Assembly Bill 486, as presented with the proposed amendment from Assemblyman Yeager. First, we would like to extend extreme gratitude to Governor Sisolak, Speaker Frierson, and Majority Leader Canizaro for bringing this extremely critical bill and working to make sure that we are able to keep Nevada from facing a potential eviction crisis. As part of the Nevada Housing Justice Alliance, Faith in Action Nevada, along with our coalition partners, stress for the need for additional protections for tenants to stave off the potential eviction cliff. COVID-19 has exacerbated the extreme imbalance of power between landlords and tenants. One of those includes the expedited timeline of our eviction process. The timeline is far quicker than the assistance available is able to reach the tenant. With AB 486, we will be able to not only get this much needed assistance to those who need it the most, by making sure that Nevadans aren't on the street. Thank you for your time, and we urge your support for AB 486.
Thank you. Next person, please.
Good morning, committee. Thank you for your time, and thank you, Chair. For the record, my name is Tess Opferman, speaking on behalf of the Nevada Women's Lobby. Stable and affordable housing are a top priority of the Nevada Women's Lobby, especially after the last year where women and people of color disproportionately face job loss and housing insecurity. This bill is a critical measure to use federal funds to ensure landlords are paid and tenants can continue to live with a roof over their heads. As we finally start to move out of the pandemic, this bill will keep women and families back on their feet so they can secure a stable employment and income, ultimately keeping their housing and avoiding an eviction on their credit report. We are in strong support of AB 486 and echo what all of those before me have said. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. Ms. Jacobs.
Good morning, Chair Carlton, Chair Brooks, members of the committee. Joanna Jacob on behalf of Clark County. I may have lost Assistant County Manager Kevin Schiller. I know you've heard from him, but I wanted to register Clark County support for AB 486 and the important goal of linking tenants and landlords as quickly as possible to the resources that we have to prevent evictions before they happen. We heard from Assistant County Manager Schiller that we have put the framework in place to collaborate with the state, with the courts, with as many stakeholders as we can, with legal aid and important critical critical partner how this looks is that we talk about deploying our resources to support the people who are in evictions and getting information as quickly as possible to them about our rental assistance programs. We've tripled our team, as Mr. Schiller mentioned, and adding 100 people just in the last 2 weeks. We also have supported landlords throughout this process. I wanted to put on the record that since March, Clark County has deployed about $130 million as of last week to landlords. They are an important piece of this process, and we remain committed to doing as much as we can to help our community respond to this crisis. So thank you very much, Chair Carlton.
Thank you, Ms. Jacob. Next, please.
Madam Chair, Chris Daly testifying in support of AB 486. Today, as the owner of a rental property in Las Vegas, near the beginning of the pandemic, my tenant lost his job in construction, was uncomfortable applying for unemployment benefits. He worked odd jobs over this past year, including in fast food, but fell further and further behind in rent each month. While he has finally been hired back to his previous job, he is now about $10,000 behind in rent. Even with full-time work, he really has no way to make up that amount of money. Last year, I did apply for landlord assistance through the CHAP program. Ultimately, the county stopped processing the application due to CARES dollars being exhausted. My tenant applied for rental assistance earlier this year, but his application has been pending for months. I'm hopeful my tenant and a small daughter are able to stay in their home. Due to the circumstances, I am not interested in pursuing legal action against him to recover back rent. AB 486 is an important bill to help keep Nevada renters in their homes, clean slates of back rent that could be hanging over tenants' heads for years, and provide relief to small landlords, including those of us who are not pursuing evictions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room in support? Seeing no one else coming forward, do we have anyone on Zoom in support, please? If you are in support, please proceed. If not, we will move to the phone lines. Is there anyone on the phone lines in support?
Anyone wishing to testify in support on AB 486, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 988. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning. My name is Emily Paulson, EMILYPAULSEN, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Nevada Homeless Alliance and the Chair of the Policy Council on Homelessness. We urge you to support AB 486. A single eviction record can make it extremely difficult to secure new housing and puts households at risk of homelessness. Nevada has the 4th highest rate of unsheltered homelessness in the nation due to a variety of factors, and we simply do not have the social service infrastructure in place to respond to a wave of households becoming homeless in the coming months. And if we do not take reasonable policy steps to help tenants and landlords get back on their feet as proposed in this bill, there will be insurmountable human, social, and fiscal costs to our state. This bill is an opportunity for our state to stave off this historic housing crisis we are facing, and I thank you for your support of this bill.
Thank you. Next caller, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 035. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Quentin Savoy, QUENTIN SAV as in Victor, WOIR. I'm the Deputy Director at Make It Work Nevada, part of the Nevada Housing Justice Alliance. In the interest of time, I concur with many of the sentiments that my colleagues and comrades have suggested in supporting AB 486. This is long overdue protection for Nevada's renters, and we deeply appreciate and urge bipartisan support for this important piece of legislation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Savoy. The next person, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 181. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Lalo Montoya, LALO MONTOYA, and I serve as the Housing Justice Organizer for Make Road, Nevada, and we are also a part of the Nevada Housing Justice Alliance. I'm speaking today in support of AB 486. With the state eviction moratorium, being lifted soon, I know that corporate greed will stop at nothing to take people's homes away. The passage of AB 486 is critical for tenants to obtain rental assistance and avoid becoming houseless. Despite having the eviction moratorium in place, corporate landlords have been evicting families. We do our best to assist tenants in obtaining rental assistance. However, the current power imbalance between tenants and landlords in many instances is too much to overcome. Tenants that we have helped apply for rental assistance here in Clark County, we helped them over a month ago. They're still waiting to hear a response concerning their application. The current eviction process does not offer any time for tenants to continue waiting for a response. AB 486 is critical to address the confusion and desperation that families are facing at this time. I urge you to pass AB 486 so that tenants have a fighting chance to stay in their home. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 202. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller 202, please press *6 to unmute. Chair, I'm going to move on to the next caller. We'll try and come back around to them if there's time. Caller with the last 3 digits, 821. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning. My name is Shane Piccinini. I represent the Food Bank of Northern Nevada. I'm not sure that there's a lot for me to add. I think the bill presentation explained exactly why we need this. I just want to say that the state's 2 food banks, 3 Square in Las Vegas and the Food Bank of Northern Nevada, have been dealing with the financial crisis of the affordable housing issue in Nevada for a long time. And the sooner that we're able to help people get back on their feet financially, the better it's going to be. But definitely the food banks have been impacted by this. And I appreciate Assemblyman Yeager for bringing this bill forward. Thank you.
Thank you. The next caller, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 653. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chairwoman Carlton and Chairman Brooks. This is Dora Martinez. I represent the Nevada Disability Peer Action Coalition. We did all of the support folks that had spoken before me, and now I'm going to go get a donut because Conan keep mentioning donut holes. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez. Next caller, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 710. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning once again, committee members. My name is Maria Nieto Orta. That's M-A-R-I-A, last name N-I-E-T-O, space O-R-T-A. Mi familia votas in full support of AB 486. Latinos have been disproportionately affected, health and economically wise, by the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic. AB 486 is needed because Nevada is not ready to face mass evictions. This bill will help all Nevadans keep their homes and ensure rental assistance is used to prevent evictions and repay landlords. As we know, these evictions are going to affect and have been affecting Latinos, people of color, and immigrants the most. Many Nevadans do not qualify for relief, and we need to ensure we are protecting them. During the pandemic, some landlords still evicted tenants even after cashing rental assistance funds and signing a contract agreeing not to evict. Some even threatened to kill ICE to call ICE on their undocumented tenants. AB 486 allows the tenant to file a wrongful eviction claim against a landlord who evicts them after accepting rental assistance. It also allows the court to penalize a landlord who wrongfully evicts the tenant. We please urge your support for this bill. Thank you for your time and for letting me testify for the corrected bill.
Thank you very much. Next caller, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 018. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning. My name is Jim, Sullivan, and I'm representing the Culinary Union. The COVID-19 pandemic has hit culinary union members and their families incredibly hard. While hospitality workers are slowly returning to work, tens of thousands of workers are still unemployed and struggling with housing insecurity. Since last March, the Culinary has worked with our housing fund and other organizations to keep workers in their home. Unfortunately, there are still too many Nevadans that have lost their homes during this pandemic. AB 486 will help keep Nevadans in their home and ensure rental assistance is utilized to prevent evictions and repay landlords. In the middle of this pandemic, working families and people of color have been disproportionately impacted by housing insecurity, and AB 486 is a step in the right direction toward rectifying that. The Culinary Union believes that every Nevadan deserves to be treated with dignity and that housing is a human right. Nevadans should not have to decide between having food on the table or a roof over their head. The Culinary Union urges the Nevada Legislature to pass and support AB 486. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 220. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, my name is Audra Hammernick, Audra, last name Hamernik. I'm the CEO of Nevada Hand, and we are the state's largest developer of affordable housing in Southern Nevada for both working families and seniors. I'm speaking today in support of AB 486, and I'll keep my comments brief. Some of the federal monies for rental assistance have requirements that make it difficult for affordable housing communities to assist their residents with the application process. Many of our residents are not technology savvy, and thereby it makes it very difficult for them to submit their applications. Despite having resident services coordinators to help them and computer labs at every one of our buildings, challenges still exist. AB 486 marries the court process and the rental assistance process and provides greater flexibility to provide more direct assistance to our residents. It will be a tremendous benefit to our residents and also the affordable housing community. We encourage the passage of AB 486. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're only going to take a couple of more in support, and then we have to flip to opposition. So if those are on the line, if we do not get to you, please submit your comments in writing to the committee. We are bumping up against the clock. So the next caller, please.
For those of you that just joined the call, if you would like to testify in support of AB 486, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no more callers in support. Oh, pardon me, there's one that just jumped on there. Caller with the last 3 digits, 247. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, good afternoon. For the record, my name is Erika Castro, ERIKACASTRO, and I'm here on behalf of the Nevada Immigrant Coalition. I just want to echo a lot of the sentiments expressed before me and urge you to support this bill. Our partners across the state have been working tirelessly to help Nevadans recover from this unprecedented health and economic crisis. AB 486 would help us avoid a disastrous eviction cliff and provide a smoother path to receive rental assistance. Thank you.
Thank you much. Is there another caller? I did say 2 more just in case. Is there anyone else?
Chair, that is the last caller we have on line at this time.
Thank you very much. I will go to opposition in the room.
Chair Carlton, members of the committee. Good morning. My name is Rocky Finseth. I'm here with Career Nevada on behalf of the Nevada Realtors. Joining me on Zoom is Ms. Banks, Mr. Spires, and Ms. Bala, and Ms. Hambrick, I believe. We've got some technical issues that we'd like to get on the record today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Banks.
Thank you very much. So if you'd like to, we'll start with Ms. Banks. If you'd like to point out your issues, and we'll move on from there.
Good morning, Chair Brooks, Chair Carlton, and members of the Senate and Finance and Assembly Ways and Means Committee. My name is Tiffany Banks, and I am General Counsel for the Nevada Realtors. Today, I'm testifying in opposition of AB 486 as drafted. We would like to thank Assemblyman Yeager for continuing to work with us on this bill and get us to a place where there is a fair and balanced approach for both landlords and tenants alike. You should have all received a copy of our full comments submitted jointly with the Nevada State Apartment Association that have been uploaded to Nellis. The first section is Section 2, the policy issue being that as drafted, it creates an affirmative defense not just to non-payment of rent, but to all evictions and squatter cases. This section also contradicts current judicial procedure in that at the eviction hearing, if the court has determined that a legal defense has been raised, then they take no action. It is difficult to tell from this language when the affirmative defense would be raised and what the consequences at that time would be. Section 3, while Nevada Realtors and the Nevada Apartment Association do not condone fraudulent action by any party, the procedure set forth in this section is duplicative of and/or in conflict with the processes already afforded by the justice system. There are also many technical issues that need to be addressed, such as what proceeds to evict a tenant really means. Landlords and property managers can assume many things. Section 4, the technical issue is that the Supreme Court Eviction Mediation Program and rules currently applies to summary eviction actions for non-payment of rent under 40.253. However, this bill covers many other types of evictions included in 215 to 425. So it's not clear if it applies to commercial premises, nuisance, other criminal activity, and formal unlawful detainer. This creates conflict and confusion for courts, landlords, and tenants. In addition, that eviction mediation program sets forth the procedure for requesting mediation. The language in this bill ignores the fact that the alternative dispute resolution process is only for those parties who request it, who meet certain criteria, and only for non-payment of rent cases. Those rules also trigger that 30 days that they have to set that eviction hearing. We can't tell from this if this is an additional 30 days. Section 5, the technical issues is that the Supreme Court Summary Eviction Mediation Rules, Rule 4, already cover the information that need to be included in the landlord notice and only requires that notice is served in that same 40.253 non-payment of rent case that I've talked about earlier. So our issue with the language here is there's no guidance on what the notice should specifically say. As contemplated in that eviction mediation program, that rule sets forth specific language to be included. So the landlord isn't crossing the line of giving legal advice. Additionally, this should again apply to non-payment evictions only. Section 6, our technical issue is there may be fiscal restraints on how those federal rental assistance dollars may be allocated and to who. And I know we've had a lot of that conversation today, but we want to be sure that if the bulk of the rental assistance dollars contemplated here have to be tenant initiated, then this entire process wouldn't work. We want to make sure that is not the case. Again, if the process can work, like discussed today, there must be an expedited process for the landlord. There are weeks of delay built into this process by requiring outreach to tenants, letting tenants know rental assistance is available. We want to skip that. There must be expedited, streamlined process in a form in which landlord can just apply. Finally, down to the end, Section 7, the $5 million isn't likely to last long. We want to make sure that those dollars are going directly to provide landlord relief and not specifically to rehouse tenants. We want to know that that's earmarked, and also know that the state treasurer may replenish the funds for this program. We would like to propose a sunset of January 1st of 2022. And finally, an additional section that says that tenant fraud should not create liability to a landlord. We would suggest additional language to provide that landlords should be protected from any and all liability should rental assistance that landlords accepted is later found to be fraudulent. As you can see, there are many difficult issues that need to be worked out, both from the legal and technical perspective. A bill initially intended to address financial assistance to landlords has turned into a confusing bill filled with problems. This type of legislation will not keep tenants in their homes, rather encourage mom and pop landlords to sell, frustrated and exhausted, leaving tenants with less and less housing options. Please consider the consequences of this bill as drafted. I'll now pass the time over to Brad Spires. I appreciate you giving me the extra time to put our comments on the record, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
And thank you, Ms. Banks. And I believe some of the issues you brought up have been addressed in the amendment. Thank you for putting your concerns on the record, but I do believe some of them are addressed. And as you move forward, working with the sponsor of the bill and with the state treasurer and those parties that are working on it, if you would incorporate the amendment into the bill so that you have a full picture and we could move forward from there. So,
thank you, Chair. And we did just begin reviewing them this morning. They do not appear to address a wide majority of our concerns outlined in our testimony. However, before formally putting that on the record, we need time to study. So thank you for your time.
And what we would like you to do is take a look at the amendment and come back with a clean list of concerns so that we don't have to fit the pieces together. So
Madam Chair,
please,
Rocky Fenseth, for the record, we will do that.
thank you. It would make it much easier for us to be able to see where the problems really lie. Mr. Spires.
Chair Carlton and Chairman Brooks, members of the committee, I'm Brad Spires, the president of Nevada Realtors. And Chair Carlton, I think the last time that I appeared with you something that was this complex was on energy audits when we were talking about houses A through F. A lot of similarities here with that, in that the 20,000 members of our Realtor Association represent both tenants and landlords. And it's been very, very difficult for all. The mom and pop landlords have most of the rentals in our state, and they have struggled. And there'll be more discussions about that struggling. And we could bring up more folks to talk about bad actors as tenants, as there have been discussions about bad actors as landlords. I don't think that's really germane. I think the majority of folks in this state try to do the right thing. So you've heard the technical things that Ms. Banks has identified. I want to talk just specifically on a couple of things. The $5 million sounds like a good number until you apply it in reality. As one of the folks who talked about earlier in testimony, they were $10,000 in arrears, and that number will get larger. So let's just say that a base number that may be looked at under this program would be $10,000. What that amounts to out of $5 million, that'd be relief for 500 landlords and tenants. Not a lot. Appreciate the idea and like having the dollars that are being discussed. However, not sure that that amount of dollars is going to be impactful on reaching the outcomes that we need to arrive at. So we've supported during session Senator Frierson's Bill 308 and Senator Watt's Bill 141. And with this one coming on here at the last minute, there's just several things that we want to look at to ensure that it's fair for both the landlords and for the tenants. And we're here to support that. And we thank you for your time, ma'am.
Thank you very much. And I think you and I and most people are in agreement that there's some landlords out there that need assistance, and we're just trying to find the most effective way to be able to help them. So thank you very much for being here this morning. The next person in opposition, please.
Good morning, Chair Brooks, Chair Carlton, and members of the Senate Finance Assembly Ways and Means Committee. My name is Vandana Bala, and I have been a realtor and property manager in Nevada for almost 20 years. I'm testifying today in opposition of AB 486. While we support a program designed to assist landlords who need financial assistance and are intent on keeping their tenants, this bill as drafted goes far, far beyond those goals. While proponents may frame this as a glide path for recovery, it is nothing more than a continuation of the moratorium for the remainder of 2021 and bogged down in governmental bureaucracy. Let me give you a taste of my experience as a property manager for many small mom and pop landlords during this pandemic. I recently had a tenant that didn't pay a single dime for months. $20,000 later, that tenant appeared in court and stated he couldn't pay rent, nor did he qualify for rental assistance. To date, this tenant hasn't paid the landlords a dime since August 2020. This is a tenant that has 2 children in a prestigious private school, personal golf carts, Mercedes, membership, Red Rock Country Club, all procured in the last 9 months, yet says he can't pay his rent and the landlords continue to bear the cost of his delinquency. Many tenants are being non-responsive. Efforts to access the federal CARES dollars through various government entities has been long and drawn out, and that assumes that your tenant is cooperative in making the necessary reach out to apply for these funds. There are countless more tenants who view that the state of Nevada and the federal government have given them a free pass to not be responsive to me or the owners that I represent. Passage of AB 486 as drafted will only further create more confusion in the marketplace and create more longer-term harm for tenants and landlords alike. I urge you to consider the policy changes and technical changes outlined by Ms. Banks, or not move this bill at all. All, and I mean all, of the burden to date has been placed on the landlord with no assistance from the federal or state governments. Everything has been focused on the tenant, including any financial assistance directed to landlords. While a handful have been responsive, the vast majority are choosing to not engage. You are creating long-term harm to small landlords that I represent. Passage of AB 486 in its current form will be devastating, and I encourage you, please not adopt it. And with that, I'd like to pass the time on to Molly Hamrick.
Please proceed.
Sorry, I needed to unmute myself. It's the phrase of the day still. Thank you, Vanna, for that quick introductions. And good morning, Chair Brooks, Chair Carlton, and members of the Senate Finance and Assembly Ways and Means Committee. As Vanna said, my name is Molly Hamrick, and I'm a property manager in Southern Nevada. We manage about 425 properties, and I'm testifying today in opposition of AB 486. It has been a struggle to get many of our tenants to apply for rental assistance, much less respond to us. We know that both landlords and tenants alike have found it very difficult to navigate the governor's directives, the federal and state eviction moratoriums, and local ordinances to determine what applies to them and when it applies. The legislative changes this session will only confuse and matters worse. This bill and others like it are going to keep landlords from providing a product in the marketplace that tenants desperately need. In my 30-plus years experiencing working with tenants, many truly cannot afford to buy a home, so renting is their only option. This legislation is going to make it harder and harder for us to provide our market with rental properties, which are essential to our thousands and thousands of tenants. Several of our landlords have to take their retirement or savings to cover the costs associated with keeping their rental properties inhabitable and to keep them current on their taxes and insurance, while other landlords simply do not have the means. They're being forced to sell rentals, reducing the overall supply of rental properties in our marketplace. We have tenants who have not paid their rent well over a year, but yet have brand new cars in their driveways and swear to us they have no means to make their rent. So landlords and tenants alike are very frustrated and confused. When thinking about the impact of AB 486 as drafted, imagine the shortage in rental units, which will drive the rental prices to increase at even faster rates. Think about the impact that Nevada families will face if there are even less rentals in the marketplace than there are right now, or that the prices continue to go up and up and up. We are seeing landlords offer rentals for highest and best. We saw that in housing, but now we're also seeing it in rentals. And this is forcing many, many families not to build or rent property. So I urge you to consider the negative consequences of this piece of legislation, and thank you for your time. Now I'd like to pass this over to Susie Vasquez of the Nevada Apartment Association.
Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. Chairs and members, my name is Susie Vasquez, and I'm the Executive Director of the Nevada State Apartment Association. The Apartment Association represents 67% of multifamily landlords in Nevada. That consists of nearly 162,000 units and growing. While we appreciate Assembly Bill 486's intent to help tenants and to make landlords whole, we oppose AB 486 as drafted for several reasons. This legislation contains many technical errors that stands to harm both landlords and tenants. The definition of pending rental application needs to be clearly defined, and the affirmative defense should only apply to cases of 7-day notice to pay or quit or true non-payment of rent, as the federal CDC order allows. AB 486 will not create more housing stability because, while well-intended, aimed at keeping people in their homes, it may actually just prolong the inevitable by keeping that individual in a living situation they can no longer afford. NRS 118A and NRS 40 are clear and afford both tenants and landlords protections and abilities to resolve contract disputes. Simply put, AB 486 is an impairment of a landlord's right to contract and a violation of due process as a deprivation of property rights. And while we oppose the bill because we do not believe it will accomplish the goal of halting evictions without violating our rights, the $5 million dedicated to fund this bill is a drop in the bucket. The Apartment Association is bleeding over $17 million a month in rental arrears. The additional requirement for landlords to accept 75% of rent owed and to waive our right to evict for 90 days is also concerning. Finally, AB 486 references a new electronic form that no one has seen for mediation. This is concerning because we have seen many issues and delays with the current rental assistance process, especially with CHAP in Clark County, who reportedly has only approved 400 applications or $3 million in 2021. An expedited process must be a priority. Otherwise, all this bill has accomplished is a headline, and the struggling Nevada's tenants and landlords alike are not better off or more whole. Please oppose AB 486. This legislation is too little, too late, and riddled with procedural and mechanical issues that will keep this body from reaching its goal. Thank you.
Is there another person in opposition on Zoom?
Madam Chair, Rocky Finseth with Career Nevada for the record. So we worked with Chairman Yeager over the weekend. We will continue to stay at the table working with him. We received the conceptual amendment at about 11:30 last night. We were not able to move it over to the clients till early this morning. So as soon as this hearing is over, we'll have a conference call and get back to you.
Thank you very much. The clock is ticking. We'd appreciate everyone being as expeditious as possible because we are down to 7 days. I can tell you the minutes and the seconds too. I've got a countdown clock going. So with that, time to get it done. Let's have those conversations. So with that, do we have anyone on the phone in opposition, please?
Anyone wishing to testify in opposition to AB 486, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 009, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning. This is Attorney Roberta Olinger Johnson. I am the Legislative Chair of the Creditor Rights Attorney Association of Nevada, CRAN. CRAN represents creditors from Main Street to Wall Street in all courts in the state of Nevada to the Ninth Circuit and beyond. We appreciate the conceptual amendment, which has resolved most of our concerns with this bill. However, we remain in limited opposition to AB 486. The Nevada Constitution states at Section 8(3) that private property shall not be taken for public use without just compensation having been first made or secured, except in cases of war, riot, fire, or great public peril, in which case compensation shall be afterward made. And the state has exercised its emergency powers of eminent domain during the pandemic. And without doubt, COVID-19 has been a time of great public peril, but the bill is coming due. While we applaud the intent to create a mechanism for landlords to apply for rental assistance, and we wholeheartedly support getting dollars into their pockets, we are nonetheless in limited opposition to AB 486. As amended, Section 8(6) forces landlords to accept the settlement of a mere 75%. This runs contrary to the law of eminent domain, which specifies full payment. Under settled Nevada law, they are entitled to the contract rate and no less. Consider that for the small landlord, this rental assistance, which it is intending to assist, 75% could be far less than their break-even point when taking into account mortgage, insurance, taxes, and their duties of habitability, which have been enforced against them. This settlement can force landlords to sell or abandon rental properties which they cannot afford to maintain for the benefit of the state. In other words, this may be too little, too late. Again, we support the overarching purpose of AB 486, and we appreciate the craftsmanship of this bill and how quickly it has been amended. And we support the overarching purpose, but we do maintain our limited opposition. Thank you very much. And that's all I have today.
Next caller, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 320. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning. My name is Joshua Campa. I'm a local property manager here in Southern Nevada, and I'm also the president of the Southern Nevada chapter of NARPM. I have firsthand witnessed the effects of the national pandemic on our landlords here in Southern Nevada being unable to take possession of their homes. Our landlords have been plagued with an avalanche of property expenses, including insurance, property taxes, utility payments, HOA dues, mortgage payments, and maintenance costs, among many, many others. My landlords, like most NARPM members' landlords, are mom-and-pop landlords that depend on their rental income. John Wickland is 87 years old and retired. He depends on his rental income for retirement and has been faced with no retirement income for the last several months. Vince Pellis moved from his property because he couldn't afford the property during the last recession and wanted to do the right thing. Instead of foreclosing on the property, he rented it out to somebody who could afford it. That tenant has stopped paying. Jasmeet Kathuria opened a small business investment portfolio of 5 properties in Nevada 10 years ago as his main source of income. His tenants have defaulted and trashed his homes during the pandemic. He has been faced with thousands of dollars in repairs and cannot sell his homes as his renters continue to occupy them and will not pay their rent. He has been left with little to no income during this dire time. Ann Sekon is 67 years old. She's rented out her home in Las Vegas to be with her daughter struggling with cancer in South Carolina. She's dependent on this property for her main source of income. She has been faced with tenants who have circumvented our system by fraudulently taking advantage of the avenues the government has made available to the consumer to stop the eviction process. These stories are not simply anecdotal. They are real life. They are Nevada, and they cannot be continued to be overlooked. They cannot continue to shoulder the burden of this housing crisis alone. Story after story, I can continue to exemplify how the pandemic has affected landlords. Implementing ambiguous legislation that is susceptible to fraud, offers no future rental assistance, and is dependent on a rental assistance program that has been plagued with endless delays, nearly no communication to homeowners, no communication at all to property managers, is a mistake. I ask our legislature today to please consider the landlords that are fighting to stay afloat, the landlords that depend on this income for their livelihood. Have mercy on them as they have carried the burden of this pandemic to try to keep tenants in their homes with no help. Thank you.
Next caller, please.
Chair, there are no more callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone in neutral in the room? Not seeing anyone coming forward in neutral. Is there anyone in neutral on Zoom? Seeing none wishing to be recognized, is there anyone neutral on the phone line?
If you would like to testify in neutral on AB 486, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there is no one to testify in neutral at this time.
Thank you very much. I guess this isn't a neutral kind of bill. So with that, we are going to go ahead and recess. We do need to get to the floor. We have a special occasion on the floor tonight. We are going to recess until approximately 6 p.m. this evening, or call of the chair to address the K-12 funding bill that will be presented to us this evening. So the committee is in recess.